The door to the vault was older than any kingdom that claimed dominion over this land. Its surface was carved with lines so ancient they had blurred into a textured landscape of grooves, chips, and worn symbols. Dust coated everything. The iron hinges, the stone archway, the floor where no foot had stepped for centuries. And behind that door waited what most believed had already been destroyed, what others whispered had never existed at all. The archivist pressed his palm to the cold surface. He was not an old man, yet the shadows deepened around him as if age itself recognized the moment. A breath of stale air pushed through the thin seam, brushing against his face like the exhalation of something newly awakened. 20 scrolls, he whispered. 20 forgotten histories. His voice disappeared into the dark. A metallic click echoed in the stillness, not produced by his hand but by the vault itself, as though it had consented at last. The door opened a fraction of an inch. Then more. The archivist stepped inside. The chamber swallowed him. Lamps hung from the walls, ancient clay bowls with petrified wicks. He lit each one carefully. Flames unfurled like waking serpents, their glow flickering across the circular room. At the center stood a stone pedestal holding a black coffer sealed with thick layers of wax. A ring of chalk symbols circled it, untouched despite the ages. He approached, breath steady, eyes sharp. For years he had gathered rumors, pieced fragments of forbidden texts, listened to accounts that ended with trembling voices and sudden silences. The scrolls inside the coffer were said to contain the stories of 20 cover-ups spanning thousands of years, stories erased not by accident, but by design, stories in which the desires of rulers, priests, and dynasties shaped the world more violently than any war. The archivist lifted his hand. The chalk ring did not react. He broke the wax seals. A pressure pulsed through the chamber, subtle yet unmistakable, as though the air had been waiting to move. The coffer opened with a sigh. Inside lay 20 scrolls, each tied with a strip of dark cloth. The first strip shimmered faintly under the lamplight, threads of silver woven into the black. The archivist touched it, and the world seemed to tilt. He untied it. As he unrolled the first scroll, dust rose from the parchment like it stirred by a dying fire. Symbols in early cuneiform spiraled across the surface, jagged, deliberate, the strokes of a scribe who had carved each mark with urgency, perhaps even fear. The archivist felt the faintest warmth in the lines, as though the ink remembered the hand that drew it. Mesopotamia, he said, the first cover-up. He began to read. Cover-up 1. The priest-king of Namu. The city of Namu had been built for the moon. That much the histories were willing to admit. But they said nothing of the rites that unfolded behind the sealed doors of the ziggurat's highest chamber. Nothing of the priest-king who bore the crescent mark upon his forehead, said to be touched by the lunar goddess herself. Nothing of the rituals that bound his rule to her nightly ascent. The scroll revealed what the official tablets did not. The priest-king, Latru, was not simply a ruler. He was a vessel through which the city believed the moon manifested her will. Every month, when the moon reached its zenith, he entered the inner sanctum where no god or servant dared follow. Only a handful of high scribes ever witnessed what occurred within, and even they did not speak of it in plain words. The archivist read of a ritual chamber draped in woven silver threads that shimmered like captured moonlight, of bowls filled not with offerings of grain or incense, but with substances described only in metaphors. The essence of longing, the breath taken before surrender, the heat that rises without flame. Sensual in suggestion, never explicit, the descriptions implied rites that stirred both fear and reverence in the witnesses. Yet something had gone wrong. The scroll described nights when the moon ascended red instead of white, casting the city in an ominous glow. Animals refused to eat. Children woke screaming. The priest-king emerged from the sanctum weakened, trembling, the crescent mark on his forehead growing darker, deeper, almost burned into the skin. The scribes panicked. They revised tablets, burned others, rewrote the lineage of Latru to hide any suggestion that the rituals had altered him. But the scroll claimed that the truth was simpler and more terrifying. The priest-king had become more bound to the lunar deity than anyone intended. His desires, whatever they were, no longer belonged to him alone. They belonged to the goddess, and she was hungry for devotion. The last lines of the scroll described a night when the moon vanished entirely. The city plunged into darkness. The sanctum doors creaked open. The priest-king was gone. Only a trail of silver dust remained, scattered across the floor like the remnants of a dream. The next day, the scribe proclaimed a new priest-king, rewriting the city's history to erase Lateru's corruption. The rituals were simplified, sanitized, stripped of anything that might recall the moon's more unrestrained influence, and every tablet mentioning Lateru was ground to powder. Except this one. The archivist breathed in slowly, letting the weight of the story settle over him. He looked at the next scroll. Cover up 2, the High Priestess of Thonis. The second scroll was longer, wrapped in a worn linen ribbon that smelled faintly of myrrh. Unlike the Mesopotamian parchment, this one bore hieratic script, fluid, sweeping strokes that curved like river reeds. As the archivist unrolled it, a soft shimmer of gold dust drifted from the page. This scroll told the story of Thonis, the Egyptian city swallowed by the sea centuries ago, a place whose temples had once gleamed with polished stone and gilded icons, a city ruled not by its pharaoh, but by its priesthood. At the center of the scroll's tale stood one figure, High Priestess Isara of Neith. Isara was said to be the embodiment of the goddess's hidden wisdom. Her voice held power over kings. Her presence commanded reverence from generals and merchants alike. Yet none of this threatened royal authority. What threatened it was the rites conducted in the deepest chamber beneath the Temple of Neith, rites only she and a handful of chosen attendants could perform. These rites were described in the scroll as a weaving of desire into destiny. Symbolic language, rich and evocative, spoke of movements, chants, and gestures that blurred the line between devotion and longing. The temple walls absorbed these rites, their carvings infused with meanings understood only by those initiated. Pharaoh Amenhotep III feared this influence. The scroll detailed how the king's advisors saw the rituals as a danger, an alternative source of power that could eclipse the throne. Isara's sway over the populace grew. Offerings increased. Even nobles whispered her name with reverence tinted by fascination. And within the palace walls, jealousy festered. The pharaoh sent spies into the temple, an act forbidden by ancient law. They returned shaken, unable to articulate what they saw, describing only impressions, shimmering veils, pulsing shadows, chants that swelled and receded like breath, movements that seemed to ripple through the air itself. Nothing explicit, only the charged atmosphere of something profound, intimate, and deeply sacred. The king acted swiftly. He commanded the temple scribes to erase certain carvings, those depicting Isara's connection to the goddess not merely as priestess, but as intermediary of the hidden mysteries. Chisels chip away sacred figures. Paint was scraped from walls. Entire stone panels were removed and thrown into the Nile under cover of night. Isara resisted. According to the scroll, she confronted the pharaoh not with anger, but with disappointment. The words recorded conveyed a sense of calm intensity, like the hush before a storm. "You erase what you cannot control," she said. "But the river remembers. The sea remembers. Even the stones you cast away will whisper." The pharaoh imprisoned her, yet the scroll claimed her cell glowed faintly each night, as though illuminated by an unseen presence. Guards reported hearing chants, soft and rhythmic, emanating from the chamber though she was alone. Some guards felt drawn to the sound, compelled by a force they could neither understand nor resist. Then came the night of the great storm. Waves rose higher than any in living memory. The sea crashed against the city. Water filled the temple chambers, drowning the unfinished erasures. The prison walls collapsed. When the floodwaters receded, Isara's body was never found. In the years that followed, Thonis slowly sank beneath the waves. Some claimed it was divine punishment. Others whispered that the city simply followed its priestess into the depths, pulled by the same force that once bound her rites. The official histories blamed structural weaknesses, coastal erosion, or mismanagement. None mentioned Isara. None mentioned the suppressed rites. None admitted that the carvings found under the sea millennia later bore traces of something erased hurriedly, angrily, as though the stone itself resisted. The archivist rolled the scroll shut. The chamber felt colder now. Flickering lamplight cast shifting arcs across the stone walls, animating the carvings with restless shadows. The archivist stood in silence for a long moment, letting the weight of the first two cover-ups settle into him. The air carried a subtle hum, as though the two stories, Lataru and Asara, had awakened something dormant in the vault. He ran his fingers lightly along the edge of the coffer, feeling the texture of the remaining scrolls. 18 more secrets waited within. 18 more hidden histories erased for reasons that had nothing to do with morality and everything to do with power. As he tied the scrolls back into place, he heard something faint, a whisper, a shift of air, a breath, not imagined. The lamp flames bent inward as though pulled by an unseen inhale. The archivist straightened, senses alert. The chamber had no windows, no openings, no drafts, and yet the air moved with deliberate rhythm, almost like a chant, faint, distant, but unmistakably real. The stories were waking, and the vault wanted them told. The archivist extinguished the lamps one by one, leaving only the soft glow of the coffer's silver threads. He stepped back toward the door, scroll secured, mind thrumming with the revelations he had uncovered. The stone chamber seemed to pulse behind him, as though reluctant to let him leave. When he crossed the threshold, the door closed of its own accord. The first two forgotten histories had returned to the world. 18 more waited, and the archivist knew that once he continued unsealing these accounts, nothing would remain buried. Not the truths carved into tablets, not the carvings scraped from temple walls, not the desires that shaped kingdoms and toppled them. He walked up the narrow corridor toward the world above, carrying the weight of the scrolls and the flicker of their secrets. Dust trailed behind him, stirred into motion for the first time in centuries. The black scriptorium had been opened, and history, true, unraveled, unfettered history, had taken its first breath. Marble has a way of preserving silence. The archivist felt this as he descended the narrow steps leading into the eastern wing of the black scriptorium, where the second pair of scrolls waited. The torches along the walls cast long, rippling shadows that shifted like figures concealed behind veils. The air here was colder than in the Mesopotamian vault, and it carried a faint hint of crushed olives and aged papyrus, an echo of the lands to which the next forgotten histories belonged. He reached the chamber's heart. 2 scrolls lay upon a slab of veined marble, each tied with a strip of deep blue cloth. One bore the faint imprint of an owl feather, the other the stylized mark of a Roman seal broken long ago. Greece, Rome, the archivist murmured. Intellect and empire. He unfastened the first scroll. Dust spiraled upward in a slow, deliberate curl, as though reluctant to leave its resting place. The parchment was brittle at the edges, but surprisingly intact, ink strokes still dark despite the centuries. The archivist began to read. Cover-up 3, The Philosopher of Corinthos. The scroll began with a single line. Let it be known that I, Menandros of Corinthos, write only what the city forbids or remember. The archivist recognized the name, though the official histories portrayed Menandros as a minor thinker, an eccentric footnote to more celebrated philosophers. Yet this manuscript, never meant for public eyes, revealed a different truth. Menandros had belonged to a secret circle known as the Thioso of the First Dawn, an intellectual sect rumored to practice dangerous initiations linked to the founding myth of Corinthos. The myth, as told to the public, was simple. The city had been built where a divine horse struck the earth, blessing the land with fertile soil and strong warriors. But Menandros insisted this myth was merely the surface of something older, darker, more primal. In the hidden chambers beneath Corinthos' first temple, the initiates were said to undergo rituals designed not to reenact the myth, but to invoke it. The founding deity, he wrote, was not the horse itself, but a veiled figure associated with appetite, an entity of dusk, neither fully divine nor human. The rites involved masks carved from stone, cold against the skin, symbols etched onto the floor in spiraling patterns, and chants that rose and fell in slow rhythms like breath. The manuscript implied a stirring intimacy woven through the ceremonies, an atmosphere thick with longing, surrender, and awakening. Sensual in tone, never explicit, These descriptions spoke of participants shedding not clothes but roles, stepping into archetypes older than the city itself. Menandros described the moment the chants reached their crescendo as convergence of minds and spirits, where logic dissolves and only truth remains. And that truth, he wrote, terrified the city's rulers. Menandros' writing suggested that the initiates developed a strange influence over public gatherings. Their voices carried a quiet power. Their gazes unsettled generals and magistrates. Some claimed the rituals had awakened an inner flame, something that stirred both admiration and unease. The Senate of Corinthos responded with speed. They declared the rites heretical, ordered the chambers sealed, and rounded up every known initiate. Menandros described the night soldiers stormed his home. He escaped only because he had suspected the crackdown for weeks, hiding his manuscript in the hollow of a statue dedicated to the goddess of wisdom. But others were not so fortunate. Some were exiled, others vanished. A few were said to have been forced to participate in a mock initiation designed to expose them as frauds, a cruel parody of the rites they once revered. The official histories rewrote the founding myth. The Thioso became a footnote. Menandros himself was rebranded a harmless mystic, a man of trivial ideas. And the manuscript? It was supposed to have burned with the rest. The archivist rolled the parchment slowly, letting the implication settle. The suppression had nothing to do with moral outrage and everything to do with fear. Fear of a philosophy that blurred thought and desire. Fear of a ritual that awakened something the rulers could not control. He placed the scroll aside. The second scroll waited like an unspoken challenge. He drew it open. The ink here was bolder, the strokes more rigid. Unlike Menandros' flowing script, this handwriting belonged to a bureaucrat. Precise, deliberate, the penmanship of someone accustomed to crafting official records. Yet the words within were anything but sanctioned. Cover up for the patricians of House Veros. Rome, an empire polished in marble and drenched in shadows. The scroll detailed the rise of House Veros, a patrician family known publicly for their generosity, political refinement, and devotion to republican ideals. Their villa on the Aventine Hill was famed for its pristine gardens and dazzling mosaics. But the eyes that wrote this scroll belonged not to a guest, nor a rival, but a former slave of the household, a man named Lucius, who served as both scribe and observer. He recorded everything the public never knew. House Veros, he wrote, controlled the Senate not through wealth alone, but through decadence carefully shrouded in ritual. Their private gatherings, never acknowledged, never openly condemned, were masked ceremonies conducted in a hidden atrium beneath the villa. The entrance was disguised as a nondescript storeroom, accessible only by those who knew which marble tile to press. Within the chamber, the air thickened with incense. The walls were painted with scenes of myths long abandoned by public religion, myths that hinted at surrender, hunger, sacrifice, and pleasure blurred with power. Guests wore masks depicting animals revered in old Roman lore: wolf, eagle, bull, boar. Never explicit, the descriptions painted an atmosphere of intense, charged indulgence, where the boundary between political alliance and personal appetite dissolved into something ritualistic. These gatherings were not simply revelries. They were weapons. Senators who resisted House Veros often found themselves invited to one of these private ceremonies. Some attended unwillingly, coerced by threats. Others came out of curiosity. But all of them left changed. Lucius observed how their votes shifted, how their posture in the Senate altered subtly, how their objections softened into compliance after a single night behind the masks. House Veros wielded these rites carefully. Not often, not loudly, but decisively. One senator in particular, Publius Marcellus, attempted to expose them. He gathered witnesses, attempted to present his accusations before the Senate floor. But the night before his speech, he was invited to the villa under the guise of reconciliation. Lucius wrote to the mask glowing faintly in the torchlight, of chants echoing through the chamber with slow, hypnotic cadence. Marcellus emerged in the morning. His speech was never given. The next week, he endorsed a law benefiting House Veros. Soon after, House Veros pushed through legislation that shifted wealth toward their allies. Opponents found themselves silenced. not through violence, but through memories of the rituals that none dared voice aloud. Lucius, in the final paragraph, confessed that he wrote the scroll in fear. He knew the family would destroy him if they learned of it, yet he felt compelled to record the truth, believing, perhaps naively, that history deserved to know the forces that shaped its laws. The scroll ended abruptly. No signature, no final word, only a dark smudge at the page's edge, as though the candle had guttered suddenly. The archivist closed the scroll. The marble chamber felt cold again, Roman cold, the cold of statues watching silently as the living performed their hidden dramas. He breathed out slowly. 2 more forgotten histories had returned, and the shadows thickened. The archivist rested his palms on the marble slab. The room seemed to inhale, as if the stories themselves were drawing breath through him. The Greek scroll had been a whisper of intellect corrupted by longing, the Roman a testament to power refined through ritualized decadence. The atmosphere hung thick with the echo of both. He sensed something shifting within the scriptorium. The flames of the torches leaned inward again, as if pressed by an unseen draught. Not violent, but deliberate, curious, almost expectant. The air cooled, then warmed, then cooled again, a tide without wind. The archivist steadied himself. 2 scrolls awakened, he murmured, and their shadows still linger. He gathered both parchments, rettying their ribbons carefully. The stone under his hands felt colder than before, as though absorbing the weight of the truths he had unearthed. Shadows coiled along the floor like soft smoke, the flicker of torchlight bending around unseen edges. The archivist turned toward the stairs. But the moment he lifted the first scroll from the table, he felt something, a pull, subtle at first, then undeniable, not physical, emotional, as though the scrolls themselves were urging him to see the deeper connections between them, between the rites of Corinthos and the rituals of House Veros, between intellect and appetite, between the ideas civilizations present to the world and the desires they hide beneath their marble facades. So he lingered in the chamber, inhaling the cold, dusty air as though it were a final offering from the era he would soon leave behind. His eyes drifted across the engraved walls. Greek owls with hollow eyes, Roman eagles with wings spread in silent authority. Each symbol seemed to watch him, frozen in stone but brimming with remembered secrets. He spoke softly, the words rising like an invocation. Let the shadows speak. And the shadows did. Echoes from Corinthos. As the archivist closed his eyes, he could almost see the philosopher Menandros standing before him. Lean, cloaked, a figure drawn in lines of determination and fear. Marble columns rose behind him, shadows stretching long across the stone courtyard of a Greek symposium. The air shimmered with the heat of oil lamps. Soft laughter drifted from distant chambers. But beneath it all lay a rhythm, measured, subtle, the cadence of the rites he dared commit to parchment. In the dim sanctuary under Corinthos, masked initiates stood in a circle, their stone masks cool against their skin. Each mask represented a fragment of the deity they worshipped, not as symbol but as presence. Menandros rode to the moment when the chant began, low at first, then rising like a breath drawn through a single throat. He had described the sensory intensity, the weight of the air, the rising temperature, the pulse of unseen forces. No explicit act was ever named, yet a charged sense filled the chamber, an atmosphere that blurred boundaries and fed the city's rumor mills with material that no scribe dared record publicly. Because once the rite reached its peak, something stirred, something that frightened even the initiates. The deity of desire and dusk, half myth, half memory, seemed to press into the room, not as a figure, but as a presence, a shiver across the skin, a tightening in the chest, a whisper of longing that burrowed into the mind. This was why Corinthos censored Menandros, not for impropriety, for dangerous influence, for the merging of thought and appetite into something sharper than philosophy, something that could reshape the city's foundations with a whisper. The archivist opened his eyes slowly, breathing out the last remnants of Greece's shadowed rites. Whispers from Rome. The recorder shifted his gaze to the second scroll. Images rose again, this time marble colder, gardens darker, mosques thicker. The villa of House Veros materialized in his mind. He heard the soft footsteps of servants preparing the atrium, the drip of water from a hidden fountain, the murmured Latin conversations behind screens, everything wrapped in layers of secrecy, as if the walls themselves tasted every word spoken inside them. The ritual chamber lay beneath the villa, its ceiling supported by columns shaped like stylized figures, men, women, beasts, all intertwined in curves that were suggestive yet symbolic, intimate yet restrained. Lucius described a flickering torchlight reflecting off polished marble like moonlight on still water. Masks rested on a stone table, the wolf, fierce, the eagle, commanding, the bull, unyielding, the boar, relentless. These were not costumes for revelry. They were identities, each chosen with intent, each worn with purpose. The masks hid not faces but intentions. Behind them, senators and magistrates surrendered their public armor and stepped into roles where desire was intertwined with political maneuvering, where pleasure and pressure became indistinguishable. Lucius had written of a strange quiet that filled the chamber before the rite began, an anticipatory hush that felt like standing at the edge of precipice. The participants spoke sparingly, their voices low, their movements measured, not debauched, not chaotic, but choreographed, ritualized, heavy with meaning. And then the chants began, slow, breath-like, soft enough to feel rather than hear. The archivist felt the echo of those voices in the chamber around him now, whispers in the torchlight, memory breathing. He saw Publius Marcellus in his mind's eye, standing at the edge of the circle, hesitant, mask in hand. He had entered the villa determined to expose House Veros. But once he stepped into the chamber, something changed. Something inside him wavered. The ritual was not violence. It was not coercion. It was persuasion woven into atmosphere, a subtle war on the senses, intoxicating in its restraint. By the time Marcellus left the villa at dawn, Lucius wrote, he no longer fought House Veros. He had been changed, not broken, not corrupted, but altered in ways only he understood. Years of political conflict evaporated in a single night of veiled ceremony. This was Rome's true danger, not war, not ambition, but influence performed behind masks, where private desire shaped public law. The archivist exhaled. The chamber awakens. The torches snapped back to life, flaring suddenly as if jolted by a silent command. The shadows that had crept along the stone floor recoiled, then surged again, circling the chamber in a slow spiral. A soft hum filled the air. Not Greek, not Latin, but something older. The archivist felt it in his ribs. He turned toward the marble walls. New cracks glowed faintly, hairline fissures filled with pale light, as if the stories themselves had carved their way into the stone, insistent on being remembered, unwilling to return to silence. He stepped back, watching the dim glow pulse like a heartbeat. These histories, he whispered, were never meant to stay buried. He could almost sense the presence of those ancient philosophers, senators, servants, priests, and initiates, all the long-dead figures whose desires, rituals, fears, and ambitions had shaped the foundations of their cities. They waited in the corners of the chamber, in the curves of the carved mosaics, in the masked shadows flickering on the walls. Not haunting, not warning, simply lingering, waiting to be heard once more. The archivist picked up the 2 scrolls and secured them inside the coffer. As he did, the hum subsided. The glow dimmed. The chamber's air grew still again, settling like dust on an undisturbed floor. He lifted the lamp. The marble door closed quietly behind him, not with force but with the gentle finality of a story completed. Section 2 was now sealed. 2 more forgotten histories retrieved from the Empire of Shadows, where intellect and appetite twined together to shape the fate of nations. The archivist ascended the steps, carrying the weight of Greece and Rome behind him, and the promise of the next forbidden truths ahead. Silk carries secrets better than stone. The archivist felt this truth as he entered the southern chamber of the Black Scriptorum. Unlike the cold marble wings that stored the scrolls of Greece and Rome, this chamber breathed warmth. Its walls were covered in fabric, ancient silk tapestries dyed in deep reds, muted golds, and worn greens, their patterns faded yet unmistakably elegant. The air shimmered with a faint scent of old incense, as though the space had once hosted a ritual long abandoned but never forgotten. 2 scrolls awaited him upon a lacquered wooden stand. One ribbon was imperial red, the other a dark saffron yellow. China, India, 2 worlds whose histories gleamed with splendor and pulsed with undercurrents of danger. The archivist touched the red ribbon first. It felt warm, even after centuries. "Dynasties are built on silk," he whispered, "and unraveled by it." He unwrapped the scroll. Cover up 5, the concubine of hidden influence, Han Dynasty. The scroll opened with a name scratched out, not once, but many times, each attempt at erasure more violent than the last. Yet traces of the characters remained, faint but stubborn, as though refusing to be forgotten. Lian. The official histories of the Han Dynasty made fleeting reference to a minor concubine briefly favored by Emperor Yuanxia. No notable lineage, no recorded deeds, no political relevance. This scroll revealed the opposite. Lian, it claimed, had been one of the most influential figures in the palace during the turbulent years when rival factions threatened to tear the empire apart. She was not born noble. She entered the palace as a gift, an ornament, a soft presence draped in embroidered silk. But she possessed something the court feared, an uncanny perceptiveness, a calm intellect cloaked beneath gentleness, a presence that drew attention without demanding it. The scroll's author, an unnamed palace attendant, described her chambers, walls adorned with silk panels depicting cranes and winding rivers, low tables holding porcelain cups, incense burning in bronze censers shaped like phoenixes. Servants spoke in hushed tones of a quiet voice, had deliberate movements, the way she seemed to turn every corridor into her own domain simply by walking through it. She never raised her voice. She never gave direct commands. Yet ministers shifted their positions after visiting her. Generals altered their strategies. Even the emperor's moods changed with a subtle tilt of her head. The scroll explained how Lian earned this influence. Not through seduction, no explicit tales were written here, but through presence, through quiet conversation offered in dimly lit chambers where incense mingled with shadows, through a way of listening that made powerful men speak too freely, revealing thoughts they intended to hide, through an aura that drew them toward her like silk drawn by static, soft yet inevitable. Her guidance shaped decisions, alliances formed, others dissolved, taxes shifted, armies redirected. The Empress Dowager grew suspicious. Lian's influence reached too far, too quietly, too effectively, a web invisible to all but the most observant. The scroll recounted the night the Empress summoned her. A moonless night, candles flickering in tall stands, silk curtains swaying though no breeze touched them. "You do not belong in the annals of power," the Empress said. Lian bowed. Her forehead nearly touched the floor. "Then I shall not appear in them." These words sealed her fate. Not death. Something worse for one who shaped history. Erasure. The Empress commanded court historians to revise records. Sculptors were ordered to alter likenesses. Attendants who spoke of her received warnings. Ministers were instructed to forget her counsel. Over time, Lian's name vanished from public inscriptions, replaced by carefully constructed fabrications. Yet the scroll claimed those who once knew her influence could not forget her entirely. They remembered her through scents, plum blossom incense drifting unexpectedly in palace halls, the rustle of silk in empty rooms, the faintest echo of a soft voice in corridors lined with shadow. The final line burned most vividly. She shaped the empire, and the empire swallowed her. The archivist let the scroll close naturally, as though the silk beneath it demanded silence. The room dimmed, its incense saturated air thickening. For a moment, he thought he saw a figure, slender, graceful, passing behind the tapestries, but when he turned, the fabric lay undisturbed. "One truth reawakened," he said softly. "One erased life returned to history." He looked at the saffron-yellow ribbon of the next scroll. India, a land where mysticism interlaced with power, where kingdoms flourish upon philosophies and collapse upon the weight of their own secrets. He untied the ribbon. Amber dust lifted from the parchment like powdered turmeric shaken from a priest's robe. He began to read. Cover-up 6, the Saffron Sect, Moyo Empire. The script flowed like rivers in monsoon, curves and flourishes, strokes that hinted at precision and rhythm. It was written in Prakrit, the common tongue of ancient India, but the prose carried the elegance of one who moved between courts and monasteries with ease. The author described a sect known only as the Saffron Veil, a group of mystics rumored to practice tantric rites not aligned with the mainstream teachings of the time. They were not renunciants, nor nobles, nor warriors. They existed at the edges of society, respected in whispers and feared in rumors. Their temple was said to stand deep within a mango grove, its roof hidden by the thick canopy. Silk banners hung from its entrance, dyed with natural pigments, ochre, rust, deep maroon. Inside, the air smelled of sandalwood and ghee lamps. Shadows danced across the stone floor like living sketches of forgotten gods. Their practices were shrouded in symbolism, breathing rituals that synchronized heartbeats, gestures made with fingers and palms that mimicked the creation of worlds, chants that rose like heat waves from desert earth. Nothing explicit was described, only a charged sense of ritual intimacy that mingled spiritual longing with disciplined bodily control. These rites, the scroll implied, stirred energies that moved through participants like unseen fire, aligning mind and body into a single instrument of intent. Kings feared them for this reason. For if a group could harness desire as a form of spiritual power, what else could they bend? Whom could they persuade? Whose decisions could they subtly shape? The ruler of the Moya court at the time, King Dasharata, saw the sect as a threat, not because of immorality, but because of secrecy, because they had influence among scholars, artisans, even some members of the royal household. Influence that was earned not through politics, but through the seductive gravity of mysticism. The scroll recounted the night the king ordered the sect's manuscript seized. Soldiers marched toward the grove under the cover of darkness. They found the temple lit by dozens of lamps, each flame flickering as if struggling to warn the mystics. The sect did not resist. Their leader, a woman known only as Matrika, stepped forward wearing a saffron veil that concealed her face. Her voice, calm and steady, echoed through the grove. You cannot burn what we have woven into the breath of the world. The king's general gave no response. The manuscripts were taken. The temple was set aflame. Silk banners curled and shriveled. Stone cracked under sudden heat. Trees shuddered as sparks clung to their leaves. Yet the mystics stood in silence, watching. The scroll's final paragraphs claimed that the manuscripts burned, but the ideas did not. Their knowledge persisted in fragments, coded gestures in dance traditions, fragments of verse in temple hymns, whispered stories told by wandering ascetics. King Dasharata forbade mention of the sect in official records. Court poets struck them from epics. Historians omitted their existence. The veil of forgetting fell, enforced by royal decree in the fear that grew between breaths. The last line read, "Where silk burns, the scent remains." The archivist let out a slow breath. The incense in the chamber thickened, turning the torchlight honey-colored. Stories of desire's power. Bodies as instruments of influence. Mysticism as a force capable of shifting empires. The scrolls pulsed faintly, as though alive beneath his fingertips. He wrapped them again and placed them carefully upon the lacquered stand. Silk tapestries rustled without wind, their woven figures seeming to shift in the corner of his vision. The chamber felt warm, too warm, like a palace corridor where secrets linger behind every curtain. The archivist stepped back. 2 more forgotten histories had awakened. The chamber dimmed, and Section 3 drew toward its close. The archivist stood in the silk-draped chamber long after he finished reading. The incense had thickened into a golden haze, pooling around the floor like fog in a temple courtyard. He felt the weight of the 2 stories, Leon's vanishing influence and the saffron veil's extinguished fire, pressing into the space like unseen figures lingering behind him. Silk remembers touch. Incense remembers breath. History remembers what rulers tried to erase. He traced one fingertip along the scroll of the saffron veil. The lacquered stand beneath it pulsed faintly with warmth, as though the wood itself still held embers from a long-burned manuscript. The archivist placed both scrolls inside the protective coffer, its bronze latches clicking shut like the locking of palace gates at dusk. But the chamber did not relax. If anything, the air tightened around him. Silk tapestry swayed without wind. Shadow pooled beneath them. A rustle, soft, almost human, echoed from the far corner. The archivist raised his lamp. What he saw was not a figure, but an impression, the outline of someone who had once moved through palace corridors, quiet and deliberate. Then another outline lay beside it, a slender shape veiled in saffron, head bowed in serene defiance. Lee and Matrica, or perhaps only the memories of them. The figures dissolved when he stepped closer, leaving only the wavering lamplight and the scent of ancient incense. Yet the feeling lingered, the sensation of being watched not with malice, not with hope, but with a calm, timeless patience, as if the women whose stories he had unearthed were waiting for him to understand something more. The archivist inhaled. The air tasted of lotus, sandalwood, and old smoke. He began walking. Corridors of silk and shadow. The southern wing of the scriptorium was a labyrinth, not a deliberate maze, but a structure built over centuries, rooms added, corridors reproposed, walls hung with fabrics older than most languages. As the archivist moved, the torchlight shimmered across embroidered patterns. A crane soaring through cloud swirls, coiled dragons with pearl-bright eyes, blooming lotuses layered like breaths in meditation, lines of Sanskrit verses woven so faintly they seemed written in smoke. He noticed something new. The tapestries nearest him quivered as he passed, their silk threads responding to his movement not like passive cloth, but like skin touched by a breeze. When he stopped, the fabric grew still. When he walked again, the rustling resumed. As if the stories woven into the silk sensed him. He reached a narrow hall where two large draperies faced each other. One was red and embroidered with Chinese palace motifs, wooden screens, delicate fans, lacquered furniture. The other was yellow ochre, its design resembling temple murals, mandalas, sacred flames, ritual vessels. He paused between them. A tension hummed in the air, faint but palpable. The two cultures, two histories, two forms of concealed power, seemed to converse across the space. Silk to silk, shadow to shadow. The archivist stood still, listening. At first, nothing, only silence thick as velvet. Then a whisper, not in a language he recognized, but in a tone unmistakably human. Another whisper followed, softer, layered beneath the first like the second stroke of a calligrapher's brush. The draperies swayed. The archivist reached out, not touching, only holding his hand near the surface. Warmth radiated from the fabric, not the warmth of fire or heated stone, but something like breath captured in silk threads, preserved across centuries. His mind flicked back to Leon, the way she turned her head slightly when a minister entered, the way her faint smile made powerful men reveal what they wished to hide, the way she shaped decisions without ever speaking them aloud. A woman's silence not because of scandal, but because she understood people too well. Then he thought of Matrica, the calm certainty in her voice as soldiers set fire to the temple, the unbroken posture, the feeling that she carried knowledge that could not burn, a mystic extinguished not because of immorality, but because she carried a power that defied kings. Two women, two eras, two different worlds. Yet their stories lay side by side here, bound by a theme that pulsed through the chamber like a heartbeat. Bodies used as instruments of influence. Desire and mysticism shaping dynasty from behind curtains. Power rewritten by those who feared it. The archivist lowered his hand. The whispers stopped. He walked on. The chamber of incense ash. He reached the heart of the southern wing, a circular chamber lined not with silk, but with bronze incense burners, hundreds of them, arranged in concentric rings like ripples frozen in metal. The air was dense with a residue of incense burned long ago, layers of scent fused into a fragrance both sweet and haunting. Some burners were shaped like cranes, others like elephants, some like lotus buds. A few were simple bowls etched with characters worn smooth by time. The archivist lifted one lid. Inside lay a small mound of gray ash, cold, fine as powdered bone. He opened another, and another. Each held ash, different hues, faintly different scents. A plum blossom, a sandalwood, a amber resin, a camphor, jasmine, a myrrh. He realized what the burners represented. Not offerings, not decoration. These were funerary urns for the memories burned by dynasties. Each burner held the remains of stories once consigned to flame, like the manuscripts of the Saffron Veil, like the erased chapters about Leon, history cremated in ritual silence. He walked to the center of the chamber. His foot touched a raised bronze circle, a platform engraved with winding patterns resembling silk fibers magnified under light. As his weight settled onto it, every incense burner gave a faint metallic sigh, a sound like the exhale of 1,000 forgotten voices. The torches flickered. Shadows rushed around him, swirling like folds of fabric caught in a windstorm. Patterns formed in the air, silk ribbons twisting into shapes. A woman's silhouette standing behind a lattice screen, a veiled mystic raising her hand in a blessing, a dynasty trembling between desire and decree. The shadows folded back. The archivist stood alone, but the chamber felt changed. The weight of the stories. He knelt and placed his hand on the central bronze platform. Leon, he whispered. Matrica. He did not call them spirits. He did not imagine they hovered nearby. He spoke their names because no one else had, for centuries. The silk-lined chamber answered with silence, not dead silence, but a living quiet, full of breath and presence. He understood then why these two scrolls had been paired. The hand concubine and the Indian mystic had never met, never known of one another, yet their stories resonated with the same vibration. When desire intertwines with insight, when the body becomes a tool for understanding, when influence flows not from rank or force but from presence, rulers grow afraid, and they order history to forget. But silk remembers, incense remembers, people remember, even when books are burned and names erased. Especially then. The archivist stood. He gathered the coffer. The bronze incense burners stilled. He made his way to the archway at the chamber's far end, a tall frame carved with dragons at the top and lotus petals at the base. As he stepped through it, the silk tapestries behind him fluttered once, as if bowing. The archivist paused. A faint trace of saffron drifted past him, then plum blossom. 2 scents crossing in the air like a silent greeting. He let them pass. Then he closed the chamber doors. The northern wing of the black scriptorium felt colder than any the archivist had walked before. The temperature dropped with each step, as though he were descending into the deep stone corridors of an ancient monastery rather than a chamber built to hold memory. Here, iron-dominated. Iron sconces shaped like crosses. Iron-bound shelves. Iron-locked ceiling cabinets that no one living had permission to open. The air held the scent of wax and cold ash, the residue of candles extinguished centuries ago. The archivist traced one hand along the damp stone wall, feeling grooves carved by monks who once believed their scratches would outlast kingdoms. 2 scrolls lay before him on a stone pedestal, one tied with black cord, one with a bronze chain. Europe, Byzantium, 2 worlds where faith and desire waged war in silence. The archivist unknotted the black cord first. He felt the chill of old abbeys in the parchment. Cover up 7, the Order of St. Enoch, medieval Europe. The scroll began with a sketch, faint, trembling lines drawn by a cautious hand. A monastery, remote, walled, perched atop a cliff overlooking a sea that never stilled. Wind carved its stones. Waves clawed its foundations. And inside its walls, the monks of the Order of St. Enoch kept rites older than the church permitted, older even than the monastery itself. The anonymous chronicler described their rituals with restraint, grand suggestion without indecency, chanting in circular formation, voices layering into something too harmonic for the era, candlelit chambers where shadows moved like robed figures, as symbols traced on stone floors, erased, then traced again on nights where silence stretched so tight the air itself felt bound. The order had been founded to guard ancient texts believed to predate Christianity. Not heretical, simply older. But as centuries passed, the monks began interpreting these texts through their own meditations and bodily discipline, blending early beliefs with the spiritual hunger of medieval Europe. Their practices blurred lines the church guarded fiercely. Not carnal, Not violent, but charged, intimate in a way that drew suspicion from outside eyes. Prayer, the chronicler wrote, conducted with breath and body intertwined. It was enough. Enough to worry bishops who smell threat in anything not sanctioned. Enough to spark fear that the order's discipline, its quiet intensity, might attract followers who found divinity not in sermons, but in something deeper and more internal. The scroll described the moment the church decided the order must be erased. A bishop arrived under the guise of pilgrimage. He sat through one of their twilight gatherings. He left before dawn. His report, preserved only in fragments, accused monks of practices that draw the spirit inward rather than upward, of ritualized unity, and of using the body as instrument rather than vessel. That was all the church needed. The Inquisition dispatched envoys. The monastery's iron gates were broken. The monks were taken, one by one, into stone cells beneath the abbey. The chronicler described the interrogations. Echoing chambers lit by single taper iron keys turning in locks heavy enough to drown out prayers, questions asked not to seek truth, but to fabricated confessions carved out by fear more than belief. Many monks refused to give details of their rites, not out of defiance, but because the rituals were not blasphemous. They were personal, sacred, intimate forms of spiritual focus. The lack of scandal only enraged their interrogators. Without explicit transgression to punish, the church invented one. Documents forged. Accusations broadened. The phrase obscene practices in darkness repeated in every decree, though no witness had ever described such a thing. The order of St. Enoch was dissolved. Its text seals are burned. Its name removed from monastic registries. Yet the chronicler left one final line. Their silence was not shame. Their silence was discipline. The archivist closed the scroll. The room grew colder, as if the breath of forgotten monks lingered still behind the stone walls. He could almost hear chant carried by old wind, voices layered, rising, falling, like waves against cliffside rock. He reached for the second scroll. Its bronze chain clinked softly, like shackles being lifted. Cover up 8, The Trial of Helena Comnena, Byzantium. The bronze chain unraveled with a metallic whisper. The parchment inside had been written by a court secretary, precise, trained, fearful. Every line measured, every curve of the Greek script cold as polished marble. The first word chilled the archivist. Her name was Helena Comnena, and she commanded armies without ever lifting a sword. Her story began in the palace corridors of Constantinople, where walls gleamed with gold leaf and incense drifted from hidden censers. Helena was a noble woman by birth, but influence came not from lineage alone. It came from presence, from intellect, from a voice that flowed like river water through the stone halls of the great palace. She attended military councils not officially, but quietly, standing by her brother, a general known more for bravado than strategy. Many records claim she merely listened. The truth in this scroll contradicted them. She advised him, quietly, accurately, often at night, in the dim antechambers of the palace where lamplight flickered across mosaic floors. She understood troop morale, supply routes, diplomatic fractures, the subtle play of ambition between generals. Her insights were whispered, never public, but they steered campaigns more effectively than imperial decrees. Soldiers returned victorious from battles shaped by her words. Her brother gained honor. Commanders gained favor. The emperor gained stability. But envy grows faster than victory. Helena's voice reached the wrong ears. Ministers threatened not by her presence, but by her clarity. And clarity in a woman with influence was a danger the court tolerated only in silence. The accusations began quietly, not of indecency, not of betrayal, but of ritualistic consultation. Priests claimed she visited shrines at forbidden hours. Advisors whispered she sought guidance from icons under shadowed porticos. Rumors spread that she practiced nocturnal rites to sway the wills of commanders. No evidence, no witness, only whispers forged into testimony. She was summoned for trial, not a modern courtroom, but a ritual tribunal, held in a stone chamber beneath the Blachiny Palace, the air thick with incense. Candles dripping wax in slow tears. Iron keys scraping locks. Monks bearing icons as if preparing for an exorcism. Helena stood alone, veiled, silent. The secretary described her posture, not fearful, not proud, but anchored, like marble resisting a storm. The accusation streamed. Of influencing military councils without authority, of practicing rites outside church doctrine, consulting forbidden symbols, possessing unnatural persuasion. She answered in calm tones. Her voice echoed through the stone chamber like a psalm. I seek only clarity of thought. If clarity is heresy, then truth has no place in this empire. Her words unsettled the tribunal. Not a defense. A mirror. That night, the verdict was sealed before dawn, guilty of subversive influence. Her brother protested, his objections erased in the final record. Helena vanished from court. Later histories recorded her as deluded by mysticism, then as irrelevant, then not at all. The secretary ended the scroll with a chilling final note. She never practiced forbidden rites. Her crime was being heard. The archivist closed the parchment. The iron sconces seemed to hum. Candles guttered though no breeze touched them. The stone chamber stretched long and hollow, as if echoing the footsteps of monks taken in chains, and the soft tread of Helena walking into judgment with the silence of marble. He placed both scrolls together. Cover up 7 and 8. Forbidden orders. Forbidden influence. Two truths buried by faith and power. The scriptorium dimmed, preparing for the next revelation. The archivist stood motionless in the cold stone chamber as the echoes of the past settled into silence. The air held the heaviness of extinguished candles, old iron, and the lingering memory of monks chanting under moonless skies. The shadows on the walls seemed to tighten around the pedestal, as if the stories he had uncovered had awakened a presence older than either scroll. He held the coffer at his side. Its bronze surface felt colder now, almost damp, as though it had absorbed centuries of fear, faith, and forbidden discipline. The torches dimmed, and the northern wing deepened into a realm of half-light. The archivist walked forward. Stone corridors that remember. The passageway leading out of the chamber was long, built of pale limestone worn uneven by the feet of hundreds of monks. Each step echoed, multiplying in the darkness as though accompanied by phantom footsteps. He reached a row of alcoves carved into the wall, simple recesses where once stood icons, now empty. But they did not feel empty. Some held the faint scent of beeswax. Others, the faint trace of incense. One in particular carried an aroma that sent a shiver down his spine. Iron, cold and sharp, like blood dried long ago. He paused, lowered his lamp, and saw a word scratched faintly into the stone. Enk, Enoch, a remnant the Inquisition had missed. He touched the engraving lightly. Dust crumbled beneath his fingers. A wind that should not exist stirred the corridor. A low hum followed, like a chant beginning in the throat of a giant stone cathedral. One voice, then two, then many, layering, rising, falling, a harmony built not from dissonance but from discipline. The order of St. Enoch had left no explicit tales of their rites, yet the sensation their ritual produced lived still in the stone, an energy born of breath and body aligned, of quiet unity mistaken for danger. The archivist continued on. The tribunal's shadow. As he moved deeper into the northern wing, the architecture changed. The narrow corridor widened into a vaulted hall supported by stone columns carved in Byzantine style, rope patterns, geometric knots, narrow fluted ridges that caught the lantern's glow. Between each column hung iron chains, rusted and dry, dangling like remnants of forgotten trials. The room felt colder here, not the natural chill of stone, a coldness laid with judgment. Helena Comnena's memory lingered in this place more distinctly than the monks. Where the order left impressions of breath and unity, she left impressions of silence and the quiet tension of a woman condemned not for her actions but for her clarity. As the archivist stepped further in, he felt a subtle shift of the air around him, something like pressure, not hostile, not welcoming, simply watching. He lifted his lamp toward the far wall. There, carved into the stone, was a fresco half chipped away by time. A woman's outline, veiled, head bowed, hands clasped at her waist. Around her stood robed figures in a semicircle, faces distorted not by intent but by centuries of decay. Above them, a single lamp hung from a carved stone chain, its flame long gone. The archivist examined the fresco more closely. Something glimmered faintly near the woman's feet. He knelt and brushed the dust aside. A thin line of gold paint, nearly erased, traced an inscription beneath her. Etta. Her voice was silenced. He exhaled slowly. The fresco responded with a faint tremor of dust falling from the chain above. He stood, and the air shifted again. The choir of keys. He walked deeper. The next chamber held iron keys, hundreds of them, hanging from long rails that stretched along each wall. Keys of every size and shape, heavy monastery keys with ring handles, thin Byzantine bureaucratic keys, intricate ceremonial keys forged with looping patterns, massive dungeon keys that looked as though they had locked cell doors thicker than fortress walls. They dangled in stillness, unmoving, silent. The archivist walked between them. His shoulder brushed one, and it swayed with a metallic whisper. Then another moved, and another, until the room became a soft chorus of hanging iron, clicking, chiming, echoing, forming an accidental music of captivity and forgotten judgment. This was where monasteries kept their forbidden records, where inquisitors stored the tools of silence, where nobles whispered confessions before ritual trials. The archivist stepped to the center of the chamber. A large key lay alone on a pedestal. Crimson rust coated it like dried paint. Its bowl was shaped like an eye. A monastery key, an inquisition key, a symbol of both spiritual gatekeeping and punishment. He lifted it, iron cold, unearthly heavy, almost humming. As he raised it, the keys along the wall swayed harder, chiming against one another in a trembling song, as though responding to an ancient command. The archivist turned the key in his hand. Shadows splintered across the walls like dark wings unfurling. The convergence. The torches dimmed to embers. The air drew inward. A faint whisper rose at the edges of the chamber, first like distant chanting, then like breathing, then like many voices speaking at once but too low to decipher. The archivist stepped back toward the fresco chamber. When he entered, the fresco of Helena Comnena no longer crumbled in silence. The painted figure seemed to stand straighter. The gold inscription beneath her glimmered. The veiled head lifted a fraction, not enough to reveal her face, only enough to imply presence rather than submission. The shadows of the robed judges beside her deepened, and behind the archivist, from the direction of the monastery alcoves, he heard the layered chants of the Order of St. Enoch swell again, this time harmonizing with the whispers rising from the tribunal chamber. Two forgotten histories, two forms of forbidden influence, two silenced voices, one collective, one solitary. Their echoes met in the northern wing, not merging, not conflicting, but standing side by side. The archivist felt the chamber's pulse shift, as though the scriptorium itself recognized a pairing. Faith and fear, desire and doctrine, clarity and punishment. He lowered the great iron key onto the stone floor. The chanting stopped. The fresco dimmed. A sudden stillness settled. Not peace. A pause, as if the centuries themselves inhaled. The closing of the chamber. The archivist bowed his head once, acknowledging the weight of the histories he had uncovered. Then he placed both scrolls into their coffer, locking the bronze clasp. The iron keys along the walls grew still. The fresco returned to cracked stone. The shadows quieted. Only the coldness remained, residual, ancient, unyielding. He moved back toward the archway that led out of the northern wing. The torches brightened as he approached, guiding him through the final stretch of corridor, their flames bending subtly toward him as if acknowledging his passage. He climbed the steps. Behind him, the chamber's door closed with a slow, resonant echo, the sound of monastic gates shutting against a storm. The iron key on the floor clicked once, a hollow note, as though marking the end of judgment. The archivist did not turn back. Perfume lingered thicker in the western wing of the black scriptorium than in any other place the archivist had walked. Not fresh perfume, no jasmine, no rosewater, but the ghost of it, old, fermented fragrance clinging to velvet tapestries that had soaked centuries of whispered betrayals. The walls had changed here. Not stone, but wood panels, oak blackened with age, polished to a sheen that reflected torchlight like dark water. Velvet draped the archways in colors that time had muted, deep burgundy, dusty violet, tarnished gold. 2 scrolls lay atop a velvet cushion on a carved wooden dais, one tied in royal blue, one tied in black satin. England, France. 2 courts where desire and power entwined like serpents in candlelit halls. The archivist inhaled. He smelled musk, wine, a trace of something floral long wilted. This was a chamber of secrets weighed not by armies or religion, but by lineage and the fragile architecture of dynasties. He picked up the blue-tied scroll first. The parchment felt warm, as if royal hands had held it once. Cover up 9, the Tudor monarch's rewritten sin. The scroll opened with ink darker than usual, thick strokes made by a court chronicler whose hand trembled even as he wrote. The matter began in a chamber no longer spoken of. The archivist leaned closer. The Tudor court that birthed the scandal was a place of corridors lined with embroidered tapestries, where servants listened behind wooden screens and nobles smiled with sharpened intentions. Here, intimacy was never private. Every whispered word could bolster or break a dynasty. The monarch, unnamed in the scroll, but unmistakably a king, had formed a bond with a courtier, not explained explicitly, not described in act, only suggested through implication. Late-night conversations in the privy chamber, exchanged letters scented faintly of amber, a hand lingering one moment too long on polished oak furniture. It was not the nature of their closeness that threatened the Tudor line. It was a consequence. The scroll stated only this. A truth emerged that could not be permitted to breathe. A child rumored, a lineage threatened, a whisper capable of shattering succession. The king's council reacted with urgency sharpened by fear. They could not excise a rumor. The court had too many ears, but they could transform it. The chronicler described a secret meeting held in a candlelit gallery. Long velvet curtains drawn shut, spies dismissed on the floor but listening above in rafters, the scent of spiced wine rising from untouched goblets. The chancellor spoke first. If this truth spreads, the crown fractures. A bishop followed. Turn desire into treason. That is the only path. Thus the rewriting began. The courtier who had once stood beside the king was suddenly accused of plotting treachery, meeting foreign agents, forging alliances, conspiring with enemies across the channel. None of it true. All of it recorded, signed, sealed, whispered into every noble ear. The scroll recorded the night of the arrest. Of velvet drapes trembling as guards entered, the courtier standing calmly as if expecting this fate, the king watching from a shadowed doorway, expression unreadable, the faint scent of rose perfume lingering in the hall as the door closed. The fabricated charges were enough. The execution swift. The rumor buried beneath a tomb of official lies. The king, the chronicler wrote, did not attend the trial. He remained in his private chamber, pacing against the cold stone as candle after candle burned to stubs. The scroll ended with a chilling line. Desire altered not the throne, but the truth that guarded it. The archivist exhaled. The chamber dimmed, the velvet drape seeming to darken with the weight of the resurrected memory. He felt the echo of old perfume cling to his coat. He set the blue-tied scroll aside. Now the black satin ribbon awaited. France. A court where beauty and poison shared veins, where rituals masqueraded as games, where alliances were sealed behind locked doors scented with incense and danger. He unwrapped the scroll. Cover up 10, the Valois court of ritual shadows. French parchment felt different. Smoother, thinner, perfumed faintly with lavender that no centuries could fully erase. The handwriting danced across the sheet in elegant curves, though the words themselves trembled with risk. The first line read, "There were no witches in the Valois court, only those who feared the hands that shaped their alliances." The archivist felt the temperature shift. A draught whispered through the velvet drapes. The Valois court was known for its perfume-soaked halls, its masked celebrations, its corridors where lovers, enemies, and spies brushed shoulders with equal grace. But this scroll exposed the machinery behind its alliances. Not magic, not sorcery, ritual. The kind performed in dim chambers where tapestries muffled sound, and braziers filled the air with intoxicating incense. The kind that blurred lines between political allegiance and intimate trust. The kind that created bonds stronger than treaties. The scroll described liaisons, not physical, not explicit, but ritualistic engagements where participants shared breath, candlelight, whispered vows, and symbolic gestures meant to seal loyalty. It was politics performed with closeness, with presence, with senses heightened by incense that curled like smoke from a burning sigil. These gatherings were orchestrated by noble women known only as La Reina de Neca, the Queen of Mother of Pearl. Not a queen by birth, but by influence, by the way she read people, by the way she forged alliances with gestures and murmurs rather than pen and ink. Under her guidance, factions that should have been enemies became allies. Families that had feuded for generations shared feasts. Rival generals agreed to support the same campaigns. Her power was subtle, persuasive, unmistakable, and intolerable. Those left out, ministers, jealous courtiers, men threatened by her art of influence, whispered a single accusation to dismantle her. Witchcraft. The scroll described the campaign against her. Candles extinguished in her chambers without cause, a servants dismissed and replaced with spies, forged letters slipped beneath locked doors, poisoned perfume bottle planted as evidence. La Reina de Neca was summoned to a ritualized trial, a chamber lit by 7 candles, a judge holding a book of psalms he never opened, a circle of nobles whose faces were veiled, though every one of them had once sought her counsel. "What have you done?" they asked. She responded calmly, her voice soft as a kiss of incense smoke. "Only what you wished of me. I created harmony in a court built on knives." The trial produced no proof, so they fabricated it. Bundles of herbs were placed beneath a bed. Drawings were planted in her desk. One witness claimed she whispered in the dark to spirits, though the scroll quietly notes he could not see her, for he described her wearing a gown she did not own. The verdict: guilty of witchcraft, guilty of corruption, guilty of influencing alliances through unnatural means. She disappeared days later. Some said she fled. Others whispered she was taken through hidden doors beneath the palace. Her chambers were scrubbed clean, her tapestries replaced. Her rituals, political, sensual, atmospheric, were rewritten into monstrous caricature. The final line of the scroll read, "Her art was not witchcraft. It was persuasion feared by those who could not match it." The archivist let the parchment fall closed. Perfume thickened in the air, poisonous sweetness, heavy as velvet. He felt the eyes of hidden courtiers watching him from the draped walls, shadows shifting as if repositioning themselves behind phantom doors. The 2 scrolls, Tudor England and Valois France, seemed to breathe together on the dais. Desire and danger, influence and execution, perfume and poison. History rewritten not to erase acts, but to conceal motivations. The archivist bowed his head once. Section 5 was only halfway whispered into light. The torches along the chamber walls flickered as though stirred by a breath the archivist could not feel. Velvet curtains shivered faintly, releasing subtle puffs of dust scented with ghost perfume. As he placed both scrolls upon the carved dais, the chamber seemed to lean closer, like a court of invisible spectators gathering for a verdict long delayed. The archivist adjusted the lamp. Shadows recoiled from its glow, as though the stories he had just awakened intimidated even the darkness itself. England and France, 2 courts that lacquered their sins with perfume, their power with etiquette, their betrayals with velvet gloves. He sensed that these 2 histories did not sit separately. They braided together across time, each reflecting a different facet of the same truth. Desire shapes kingdoms, and kingdoms rewrite desire. The archivist stepped deeper into the chamber. The gallery of painted masks. At the far end of the velvet-draped hall, an archway framed a narrow corridor lined with portraits. Their frames were intricately carved, gilded, and cracked, each surrounding a face painted in lifelike Renaissance detail. The archivist lifted his lamp. The candlelight played across powdered cheeks and jeweled collars, deep eyes shaded by the secrecy of unspoken courtly games. No nameplates, no titles, only faces. He paused before the first portrait, a man with a calm half-smile, his eyes lowered as if listening to a distant confession. The painter had captured an expression that leaned between affection and caution. The archivist recognized it, not the identity, but the look, the subtle tension of someone who had once stood very close to a Tudor throne. The portrait next to it showed a woman draped in silk, throat encircled by pearls. Her gaze was steady, unblinking, as though she understood that pearls could strangle just as elegantly as they could adorn. Another portrait, a French nobleman with a feathered collar and a ring on each finger, his eyes painted so dark they reflected the archivist's lamp-like mirrors. Another, a woman whose mask-like face revealed nothing, yet her painter had given her a single detail that betrayed everything. Her hand rested on a closed fan, knuckles whitened slightly, as though she were holding back a truth that could ruin a kingdom. The gallery whispered, not audibly, but atmospherically, each portrait exhaling old secrets, old rivalries, old perfumes ground deep into the wooden frames. Behind the portraits, something clicked softly. A latch, a hidden mechanism. The archivist turned. The portrait of the masked woman had shifted slightly open, revealing a narrow slit where a wooden panel had loosened. He reached behind it. His fingers brushed cloth. He pulled gently. A ribbon came loose, an old, faded ribbon that had once been black satin. Now it was gray at the edges, frayed like a whisper stretched too thin. Attached to it was a note. He unfolded it carefully. Handwriting looped across the paper. We were not witches. We were the architect of alliances. La Reina de Naka had left this behind. A final testimony. A confession without guilt. A statement without apology. The archivist tucked the note beside the scrolls and moved on. The chamber of perfumed smoke. He followed the corridor into a circular room where the ceiling rose into a dome painted with faded frescoes, gold stars, swirling constellations, and faint outlines of winged figures holding censers. The floor was black marble. The walls were framed with tall brass braziers overflowing with cold ashes. Here, rituals had once taken place. Political rituals performed in secrecy, disguised as entertainments or incense ceremonies. The archivist knelt beside one of the braziers. He stirred the ashes with his gloved hand. A faint aroma lifted, a blend of burnt lavender, frankincense, and something metallic. Not blood, but a tincture used in royal courts to sharpen the senses, worn by courtiers during intense debates or night councils where every breath mattered. He stood and looked upward. The dome center depicted a single, immense eye, painted with delicate strokes, surrounded by curling gold leaf rays. Not a mystical symbol, but a reminder, in courts of kings, someone is always watching. The archivist stepped into the center of the room. The black marble beneath his feet glimmered with embedded flecks of gold. He felt the faintest vibration run through it, like the heartbeat of a palace that no longer existed. He closed his eyes. Perfume, ash, dust and whispers. The chamber held memories thick as velvet, interwoven sense of deception, alliances brokered behind drapes, accusations forged in jealousy. No single story dominated. Instead, 100 court intrigues blended into one slow inhale. A hidden choir of histories breathed around him. The veiled spy's passage. When he left the smoke chamber, he entered a stairwell spiraling downward. The steps were narrow, worn in the center by countless footsteps, spies, servants, nobility slipping unseen between private rooms and council halls. The stairway opened into a dim corridor lined with small alcoves, each containing a wooden screen carved with delicate latticework. Listening posts. Places where spies once crouched behind perfumed curtains, collecting fragments of conversations that later shaped executions. He knelt by one screen. Behind it, a faint echo stayed, a murmur too soft to decipher, repeating endlessly like a memory trapped between wood fibers. He pressed his ear closer. Not words, breaths, measured, steady, like two voices sharing air in a dark corner, ensuring no sound escaped but what must be heard. He listened until the echo faded. Then he rose and returned to the main chamber where the two scrolls waited on their velvet cushion. The Court of Shadows awakens. As the archivist approached the dais, the air around it seemed to thicken. The blue-tied Tudor scroll unfurled slightly, as if stirred by a breeze that did not exist. The black satin French scroll darkened at its edges, ink lines shimmering faintly as though recalling candlelit rituals long extinguished. The velvet drapery along the walls fluttered. Perfume, unmistakably amber and lavender, filled the room with renewed sharpness. The portraits in the gallery clicked faintly, frames settling into place. The chamber reacted not with menace, but acknowledgment. Two courts, two cover-ups, two dynasties shaped by desire, yet terrified of its implications. The archivist placed his hand atop the coffer, ready to store the scrolls. But the chamber spoke first, not with sound, with alignment. The torches burned in unison. The curtains stilled, the air cleared. A tone, subtle, harmonious, vibrated through the wood panels, like a court musician striking a single perfect note on a harpsichord. The archivist paused. He realized the chamber was not remembering scandal. It was remembering power, the quiet, intoxicating, velvet-draped force that moved through royal courts more effectively than decrees or armies. The kind of power too fragile to be recorded, too dangerous to be acknowledged, too influential to be forgotten. The archivist slid both scrolls into the coffer and closed the lid. The chamber exhaled as one. Perfume faded. Shadows returned to their corners. The portraits fell silent. He bowed his head once to the histories he had awakened. Then he stepped beyond the velvet drapes and ascended the stairs, leaving the black court of kings to settle back into stillness. The moment the archivist stepped into the southern vault, the air changed. It thickened, humid, heavy, carrying the scent of wet earth, scorched parchment, and distant rain. The stone walls sweated with condensation, and vines had pushed through cracks in the mortar long ago, leaving the room veined in green like the jungle had been trying, for centuries, to reclaim its stolen texts. Two scrolls rested on a slab of basalt instead of wood, one tied with rough twine, one bound in cracked, dark red leather. Not European materials, not courtly hands. These scrolls came from a continent where moonlit gatherings carried the weight of both desire and resistance, where ritual survived conquest by burrowing into shadows and symbols. The archivist brushed aside a centipede skittering across the basalt. Its legs glistened like obsidian needles. It disappeared into a crack. A torch hissed behind him, humidity fighting flame. The archivist untied the twine cover-up 11, the governor's nocturnal circle. The parchment smelled faintly of tobacco and rain. The script was uneven, written by someone who learned to write not in a monastery but in frontier posts, letters shaped with haste, ink running where humidity had warped the paper. The opening lines were blunt. The governor held councils at night, not in his office, but in the courtyard behind the barracks. The archivist read on. The colonial outpost was a place of heat and cramped walls, where soldiers whispered of shadows moving in the tree line and missionaries insisted every unfamiliar murmur was heathen superstition. But the governor, the unnamed man whose title alone served as his identity, held influence built not merely on commands but on the atmosphere he cultivated after dusk. The scroll did not describe scandal explicitly. Instead, it described what the church deemed unrecordable. Midnight gatherings lit only by oil lamps, the governor seated in a circle of trusted aides, a rhythmic drumming drifting from beyond the palisade, exchanges of words whose meanings were half political, half something else, ceremonial tokens passed hand to hand, carved bones, feathers, polished stones still warm from being held too tightly. The gatherings were sensual only in tension, in the way presence pressed close, breath mingled with the thick, humid air. The scroll described it as a fever of influence. Not intimacy. Authority. Shared, shifted, braided between men who could determine territorial lines with a single whispered agreement. The governor used these nocturnal circles to cement loyalty not recorded in any colonial register. The church discovered this not through witnesses, but through unease. Missionaries noted how orders changed after these gatherings. Maps redrawn. Villages spared or razed. resources diverted on whims unexplainable by council meetings. The church confronted him. He smiled, and the scroll recorded a chilling line. He said the knights guided him. The church could not accuse him outright. They had no proof, only the discomfort of a man who made decisions guided by influences they didn't understand. So they rewrote the narrative. They claimed his nighttime councils were tactical discussions, strategic vigils, moments of prayer. The drumming became wind through palm fronds. The tokens became trinkets gifted by loyal natives. The meetings dissolved into respectable myth, but the scroll exposed a hidden truth. The governor did not obey the church. He obeyed the knight. The archivist paused, feeling a trickle of sweat travel down his spine. The chamber itself grew warmer as though the jungle stories exhaled through the walls. Something rustled overhead, maybe a lizard, maybe something older. He set the first scroll aside. The twine curled like a dried snake. Then his eyes fell upon the second scroll, the red-leather one, its edges gnawed by insects long dead. A symbol was etched into the leather, a spiral with 3 radiating lines. Not European, not missionary. Aztec, oh, what remained of them? The archivist opened the scroll. It was heavier than it should have been, as though secrecy had weight. Cover up 12, codices in the ashes. The parchment inside was not parchment. It was amethyst, a Mesoamerican paper made from tree bark, still holding the faint earthy scent of sap. Its surface was filled with pictographs, glyphs, and symbols arranged in flowing lines. But woven among them, almost invisible except in the right angle of light, were faint ink strokes shaped by missionary hands. 2 languages, 2 histories led, one hiding within the other. The archivist lifted the lamp. Under the golden light, the hidden glyphs revealed themselves like insects crawling from beneath a stone. The scroll told of priests from a fallen Aztec order, survivors who outlived the empire in silence. They walked disguised among laborers and servants, their ceremonial garments traded for coarse tunics, their calendars burned, their gods cursed by foreign tongues. Yet they persisted, not through open rites, but through coded survival, by embedding fragments of their rituals into missionary texts, folded into hymns, disguised as decorative flourishes in copied catechisms, tucked between the lines of confessions written by trembling hands. The scroll described one such priest. He wrote by moonlight in a hut that smelled of damp earth and crushed petals. His fingers trembled not from fear, but from urgency. The rituals he preserved were not explicit. They were sensory. Incense made from jungle resin smoldering in clay bowls, gestures tracing the air like constellations, chants whispered until breath became vibration, symbols drawn in ash on skin as a reminder of lineage. These practices were intimate in the way devotion always becomes when performed under threat of annihilation. The church found traces of these codes decades later when translating a cluster of missionary records. The translators were confused. Why was certain glyph repeated near the passages describing sin? Why did decorative flourishes match symbols from burned codices? Why did a hymn share the cadence of an Aztec invocation? The discovery caused panic. They did what conquerors always do when confronted by the resilience of the conquered. They burned the evidence. They blamed misinterpretation. They accused the indigenous scribes of sabotage. The scroll held a line written in 2 scripts. What survives beneath fire cannot be rewritten. The archivist ran his thumb along the amethyst. It felt warm, alive, like bark that refused to surrender its tree. He continued reading. The survivors of the order had hidden coded manuscripts in places the church would never search. Under floorboards of stone huts, inside hollowed gourds hung in kitchens, beneath altars built by missionaries too horrid to check the soil. And some, like the one before him, had been smuggled across oceans, bound in leather and tucked inside shipments of goods, mistaken for colonial documents. This particular scroll ended with a final symbol, a stylized heart pierced not by a blade but by a quill, ink instead of blood, memory instead of death. The archivist closed the scroll softly. The chamber trembled, not physically, but atmospherically. The jungle shadows painted onto the walls seemed to deepen. Something drummed far away, perhaps imagination, perhaps memory carried across centuries. The air grew feverish. Humidity clung to him like a second layer of skin. The script tore him wanted more. He placed both scrolls into the basalt groove carved for them, and the chamber exhaled hot air that smelled of rain, ash, and old ritual. The torches hissed as though something unseen exhaled against their flames. The air thickened further, growing heavy with the scent of wet stone and crushed leaves. The archivist stepped back from the basalt slab, the two scrolls now resting inside their carved recess. For a moment, the room felt alive, not metaphorically, alive the way a jungle is alive, with a pulse that has nothing to do with human presence. The vines that crept along the walls looked darker now, their shadows stretching like fingers toward the basalt. The sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere deep in the southern vault, a slow, steady rhythm like the beat of a distant ritual drum. The archivist steadied his breath. The new world had grown loud in its silence. He turned toward the archway, its frame carved in a style that merged stonework with natural growth, roots, serpents, jaguars, and swirling clouds etched into its edges. The carvings were so detailed they seemed to shift subtly in the flicker of the lamp, as though ancient artisans had captured not objects but motion itself. He stepped through, the whole of half-burned codices. The next chamber was larger, an oven of stone, its ceiling lost in shadows. Shelves along the walls sagged under the weight of charred manuscripts, their edges blackened and flaked. Many were unreadable. Some were nothing more than as held together by memory. Others bore fragments of illustrations, a feathered serpent scale, a solar disk, the silhouette of a figure standing between worlds. The archivist approached one shelf. He touched a codex whose cover had melted into itself from heat. The moment his glove brushed it, the ash settled into a different shape, as though something inside it still remembered the lines that once covered its pages. He lifted a corner gently. A page crumbled into powder and drifted to the floor like gray snow. Yet another page, half-preserved, revealed a glimpse of vivid red pigment. A single line of Aztec glyphs danced along its edge, some intact, others smudged by flame. The archivist traced the air above the page with his finger, not touching it, only reading its ghost. The glyphs translated roughly to, "What was taken by fire returns in breath." He stepped back. The codices around him seemed to shift, their half-burned pages rustling though there was no wind. This room held a memory of destruction, of pyres built by terrified missionaries, of flames rising higher than temple walls, of smoke carrying away centuries of knowledge. But it also held the resilience of scribes who refused to let their world be erased completely. The archivist walked deeper into the hall. Under one shelf, he found a small clay jar, cracked but intact. Inside lay a single spindle of agave fiber, dyed black, a writing tool, a survivor. He placed it back softly. Some things were not meant to leave their resting places. The governor's lost courtyard. A doorway ahead opened into a courtyard reconstructed from fragments brought across oceans. The stones underfoot were not original. Those were dust under modern cities, but they were arranged in the pattern described in missionary records. Moonlight seeped through an unseen opening in the vault above. Not bright, not direct, a pale, diffused light like the glow of the moon choked by canopy. The archivist stepped forward. The courtyard held. Oh, a broken fountain whose basin was filled not with water but with white sand. Torches placed in iron sconces shaped like coiled serpents. Oh, a circle of stones marking where the governor and his council once sat. Stains of darker coloration that might once have been dye, oil, or something less explainable. He walked toward the stone circle. The air inside it was warmer, thicker, as though the gatherings had left an imprint on the atmosphere itself. The scroll described the governor's nocturnal circles as fevers of authority, and now the archivist understood. Power leaves a trace, invisible to those who don't look for it, overwhelming to those who do. He knelt in the center. The stones around him radiated heat, not enough to burn but enough to make his skin prickle beneath his coat. A hum rose, low, indistinct, as though echoes of old drumming were caught in the courtyard geometry. The archivist closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he sensed shapes moving, shadows of men whose names were erased, leaning toward one another in shared tension. not touching, not whispering, but communicating with a stillness that was heavier than speech. He opened his eyes. The courtyard was empty, but the heat held its form. The Delta Passage. Moving on, he entered a narrow tunnel vein with roots that had pierced through the stone ceiling. Water dripped along the walls, forming little rivulets that carved patterns through moss. The ground was soft, cushioned by centuries of plant decay. This passage had been dubbed by missionaries as a transport corridor, but the scribes of the fallen order had used it as a hidden artery of resistance. Symbols etched faintly into the walls confirmed it. Spirals, jaguar prints, the stylized mark of Ehikatl, god of wind. The archivist brushed his fingertips across a spiral. Immediately, the temperature shifted. A hot gust swept through the tunnel, though no opening existed. The vines overhead rustled as though reacting to an unseen movement. He followed the carvings deeper. 2 symbols appeared repeatedly, one shaped like a flame, one shaped like a heart. He recognized the meaning. The flame, destruction by colonizers. The heart, survival by memory. Together they meant the heart survived the fire. He reached the end of the tunnel. A stone door blocked the exit, carved with an elaborate scene of priests in procession. Some carried censers, others carried scrolls. One held a book chained shut, a symbol of imposed silence. The archivist pushed. The door groaned open. The red sanctuary, the chamber beyond glowed faintly red. The walls were painted with ochre pigments, some faded, some newly vibrant. Niches held clay figurines half-melted yet softly luminous in the lamplight. This space was not European, not missionary, not shaped by conquest. It was a surviving heart of the fallen order, a sanctuary rebuilt within ruins. The floor held mosaic, broken but recognizable. It depicted a figure kneeling beneath a crescent moon, surrounded by swirling shapes that symbolized breath, memory, and continuity. The archivist knelt beside it. Everything was quiet. Then, from somewhere deep within the walls, a low rhythmic thrum began, like drumbeats softened by distance and time. They rose gradually, as if awakening from centuries of enforced silence. The archivist rested his hand on the mosaic. The stone pulsed once, not metaphorically, a faint, warm vibration, as though the sanctuary itself acknowledged his presence, recognized him as a witness not of conquest, but of remembrance. A carved panel on the wall shifted slightly. He approached. A slot opened near the bottom, revealing a rolled parchment protected in a cylinder of hardened resin. A hidden scroll. The archivist withdrew it. The glyph on the resin tube was one he recognized. That which is taken must return. He tucked it inside the coffer with the others. The drums faded. The red glow dimmed. The chamber settled back into its centuries-long rest. The archivist rose and walked back toward the main vault, the closing of the southern wing. When he placed a newfound scroll with the others, the basalt slab vibrated softly, like a sleeping creature adjusting its breath. The torches along the walls burned lower. The vines tightened against the ceiling. The whole of Codices stilled. The New World's night maze returned to their uneasy silence. The archivist bowed once to the southern wing, acknowledgment offered to histories that survived despite everything done to erase them. He stepped through the archway. Behind him, the chamber closed with a slow, heavy sound, like stone grinding into memory. The archivist entered the eastern wing of the scriptorium slowly, as though stepping into a perfumed dream carved from smoke. The air here was different from all the chambers he had walked before, heavy with rosewater, amber resin, and the faint metallic scent of ancient ink. The torches flickered with a warmer glow, casting radiance like candlelight through silk. 2 scrolls awaited him atop a pedestal of polished walnut, one wrapped in gold-threaded cloth, one tied with black ribbon and sealed in crimson wax. Hey, history had been shaped not by conquest, but by hypocrisy. Empires had pretended to be moral while burying scandals deeper than any battlefield grave. The archivist lifted the gold-wrapped scroll first. The scent of rose and spice smoke rolled from it like breath from a sleeping palace. Cover up 13, the saffron edict. The scroll unfurled with a whisper. The script within was elegant Ottoman calligraphy, Letters curved like dancers' limbs, ink shimmering faintly under torchlight. The language sang across the parchment, even in silence. This was no simple political record. It had been shaped by the hand of a court calligrapher, someone trained to turn words into ornament and meaning into veiled truth. The title burned along the top, the Saffron Edict of the Third Court. The archivist knew this edict. Every historian did. It was recorded as a proclamation regarding ceremonial reforms, innocuous, polite, written in the language of bureaucratic tidiness. What no one recorded was a scandal buried beneath it. He read the hidden marginalia, written in faint ink meant to be visible only in lamplight. It began in the Court of Roses, where the curtains hid too much. The scandal revolved around a powerful court official, unnamed in official records, known only as the Keeper of Keys. He commanded a private wing of the palace, a place filled with cushions embroidered with gold thread, perfumes so thick they lingered in clothing for days, a whispering corridors where proximity meant influence, doors always half opened, never fully shut. The court had long tolerated his power. Desire woven into political alliances was nothing new in the Ottoman court. But one night, someone entered the forbidden wing, a young vizier, newly appointed and unfamiliar with palace boundaries. He witnessed something that should not have been seen. The scroll never described it directly, only sensory fragments. A shadow swaying behind lattice screens, the rustle of silk intertwined with plotting, the glint of jewels on figures gathered too close to one another, voices speaking in tones layered with tension, political, personal, inseparable. The vizier fled. The Keeper of Keys learned. And the next day, the vizier's body was found floating gently along the Bosphorus, clothed as though for a feast, eyes closed as if dreaming. Official cause, accidental drowning. Reality, a lesson carved into water. But the scandal went deeper. Someone whispered of a ledger hidden in the private wing. Names, meetings, alliances built upon shared nights rather than decrees. If revealed, it could have toppled half the court. The Sultan reacted not with outrage but with silence. He issued the Saffron Edict, a public proclamation about ceremonial reorganization, but secretly. He had dismantled the keeper's wing, burned his ledgers, erased his influence, restructured the palace so thoroughly that no one could trace the scandal's shape again. The Keeper of Keys vanished. Some said he left voluntarily. Some said he was given a silken cord and the privacy of choosing his own fate. Some claimed his ghost still lingered in the scent of rosewater during palace festivals. The scroll ended with an annotation by the same hidden scribe. The court pretended it feared scandal. What it feared was truth. The archivist re-rolled the parchment gently. The perfumed air thickened again, as though recalling the old palace's walls, corridors lined with shadow, secrets stitched into the weave of tapestries. He placed the gold-wrapped scroll down and reached for the black-ribbon wand. Its wax seal was dark red, like clotted blood pressed beneath a signet ring. London fog seemed to seep from the ribbon itself. Cover up 14, the fob-bound letters. This scroll was English, but the ink was darker than typical Victorian correspondence. Dense strokes, hurried lines, words written under pressure. The script trembled slightly, as though the writer had shaken from cold or fear or forbidden anticipation. The archivist unfolded it. A date scrawled at the top. London, 1864. The letter described an aristocrat, unnamed, as always, whose influence reached cabinet rooms, charity boards, royal receptions, and the hushed balconies of opera houses. A man who championed moral reforms publicly, writing speeches on purity, virtue, and the decline of British morality. But the scroll recorded the other side of the coin. The side hidden beneath the gas lamps of Whitechapel alleys and behind velvet curtains of exclusive clubs where no servants were permitted entry. The first line of the hidden testimony read, "Those who preach virtue most loudly always wore the thickest masks." The aristocrats' desires were not scandalous for their nature. They were scandalous for their implications. He visited gatherings held in old townhouses and abandoned warehouses, meetings illuminated by a few flickering candles and the murmur of voices trading not bodies, but influence disguised as temptation. Cigarette smoke curled around whispers. Glenlivet hissed softly as it was poured. Agreements were forged in dimly lit rooms where everyone pretended to be anonymous. But anonymity is fragile. A leaked letter, sealed in blood-red wax, was found in the hands of political rival. A letter describing one of these clandestine nights not through explicit detail, but through metaphor so potent it left no doubt about the writer's involvement. The rival intended to expose the aristocrat, but the aristocrat struck first. He launched a moral crusade, a movement against degeneracy in London's underworld. Pamphlets were printed, committees formed, newspapers filled with outraged columns. He became the face of Victorian purity. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, printing houses were bribed or threatened, witnesses vanished into the fog and never reappeared. The incriminating letter was declared a forgery. New scandals, fabricated and strategically placed, ruined the rival's reputation instead. The aristocrat emerged untarnished, even celebrated. His desires were buried beneath the rubble of others' lives. His hypocrisy became law. The scroll ended with a quiet line. London's fog hides everything if you feed it enough names. The archivist let the parchment fall closed. The gaslight flicker in the chamber seemed to dim, as though acknowledging the suffocating weight of Victorian duplicity. The two scrolls lay before him, perfume and fog, silk and smoke, both telling the same truth. Empires had their desires not because they were forbidden, but because they were powerful. The scriptorium hummed softly. The archivist inhaled a mixed scent, rosewater and coal soot, and whispered into the darkness. Two more masks removed. He placed the scrolls into their carved recess. The chamber sighed. The torches flickered. The eastern wing grew quiet once more. The torches along the eastern wing guttered as the archivist sealed the two scrolls into the alcove. Their scents, rosewater from the Ottoman court in coal-tinged London fog, began to merge into a strange, bittersweet perfume that settled along the stone walls like a ghost unwilling to depart. The chamber grew quiet, but not still. There was movement beneath the silence, a shifting, a faint rustle, as though the stories themselves were adjusting, settling into the scriptorium's memory. The archivist remained motionless for a moment, letting the weight of the two cover-ups sink into him. These had been born not from violence or conquest, but from duplicity, empires that wore morality like armor while concealing their own appetites beneath embroidered curtains and fog-drenched nights. He turned. A smaller archway stood at the chamber's far end. Until now, it had been nearly hidden by the drifting shadows. Its frame was carved with motifs unlike the others, swirling lattice patterns reminiscent of Ottoman lattice screens on one side and intricate Victorian floral scrollwork on the other. Two cultures, two hypocrisies, interlocking seamlessly. He stepped through the perfumed corridor. The corridor beyond was long and narrow, lined with carved cedar panels. The scent of aged perfume clung to them, rose, amber, and musk, faint but persistent. Under the lamplight, the carvings seemed alive, shapes of tulips and cypress trees blending into silhouettes of gas lamps and curling smoke. This was the archivist's favorite kind of passage, one built not by architects, but by memory. He traced a hand along the cedar. The wood was warm, and something whispered. Not a voice, just a slight shift of air, the creak of panels settling. But the archivist had walked the scriptorium long enough to know that certain whispering silences meant the scrolls wanted to show more. Not text this time. Context. He advanced slowly. Halfway down the passage, he found a small niche containing two objects. A golden lattice fragment from a toppled Ottoman screen, a cracked London ceiling stamp stained with fading red wax. They rested side by side, their histories intertwined by the universal language of concealment. The archivist lifted the lattice. The carved filigree was delicate, curling in tendrils like vines. A palace would have used such screens not merely for beauty but for distance, softening the gaze, turning rooms into silhouettes and shadows. People spoke freely behind lattice work, believing themselves unseen. But nothing spoken behind patterns of gold truly vanished. The ceiling stamp beside it was heavier. Its handle was oak, its brass had engraved with an aristocratic crest scraped half away by some hurried hand. The crimson wax dried in its cracks looked almost fresh even after more than a century. Secrets, the archivist reflected, leave a residue that neither time nor fire can entirely erase. He set the object back gently, and the silence shifted again, soft, approving, inviting him onward. The chamber of masks. The corridor opened into a circular chamber lit by a single hanging lantern. The lantern emitted a dim golden glow, swaying ever so slightly as though disturbed by a breath the archivist could not feel. Around the room hung masks. Ottoman porcelain masks with enamel glazes, smiling faces, half-lidded eyes, expressions crafted to hide more than they revealed. Victorian papier-mâché masks used for clandestine soirees, painted in black and white, edged in silver, their expressions blank but aware. But two masks, larger than the rest, dominated the chamber. One shaped like a crescent moon, painted in midnight blue with gold leaf patterns swirling across its surface. The other shaped like a fog-shrouded eye, its edges feathered in gray. These were not mere ornaments. They were metaphors constructed into form. The archivist approached the crescent mask. Behind it lay a recessed shelf. Dust stirred as he reached inside, brushing against folded velvet the color of deep saffron. He drew it out. It was a fragment of the robe once worn by a palace scribe, embroidered with symbols that meant little to anyone except those who knew the clandestine language of courtly relations. The fabric carried a faint trace of perfume, like an echo of a person who had moved through rooms lit by oil lamps and lined with gold. He tucked the fragment back. Then he turned to the fog-shrouded mask. Behind it lay a flat wooden box, no larger than a stack of letters. Inside rested a single quill broken cleanly in half. A letter-writing quill. Victorian. A symbol of a crisis that had nearly rewritten political history, if not for a man skilled in turning morality into weaponry. These artifacts did not belong to any archive outside these walls. They were too honest, too unvarnished, too close to the truth empires needed to bury. The archivist closed the box and replaced it behind the mask. The lantern above flickered, as though acknowledging the ritual witness. The gilded stage. On the far end of the chamber, a curtain of sheer gold fabric draped from ceiling to floor. When the archivist brushed it aside, he found a raised platform behind it, small, square, framed in dark wood. It resembled the stage. He climbed onto it. Immediately, the temperature shifted. The chamber darkened except for a single beam of lamplight overhead, illuminating him as though he were the speaker in a hidden salon or a palace hall. He closed his eyes. Whispers gathered around him, so faint he couldn't distinguish words, only tones. A urgency from palace servants who saw too much, a breathless fear from a vizier who opened the wrong door, the measured cadence of a Victorian moralist writing false outrage into speeches, the muffled sob of a rival ruined in fog, the slow crackle of burnt letters in a London fireplace, the rustle of palace curtains closing over a secret rather than a window. The whispers converged into a soft hum, vibrating through the stage. This was not memory. This was ritual. The archivist stepped off the platform, the hum fading behind him like a curtain dropping after a performance in which the actors were long dead. The final alcove. At the edge of the chamber lay a final alcove carved into the stone, deeper than the others, framed in gilded molding that glinted like the shine of gold-threaded robes and gaslit brooches. Inside rested a small metal box. Ottoman script etched one side, Victorian cursive etched the other. The archivist opened it. Inside were two slips of parchment. One read, in Ottoman calligraphy, "Every edict hides a hand." The other read, in Victorian ink, "Every virtue hides a mask." Two empires, two scandals, one truth. He placed both slips back into the box and closed the lid gently. The scriptorium shifted. The lantern brightened. The masks along the walls seemed to inhale and then exhale in unison. The chamber accepted the archivist's witness. The scrolls were settled. The secrets were awake again. And Section 7 was complete. The archivist descended into the western vault of the black scriptorium, a place colder than the others, smelling faintly of iron, soot, and machine oil, scents belonging to centuries where gears replaced scrolls as instruments of power. The torches here burned blue, their flames thin and mechanical-looking, as though fire itself had adapted to the age of industry. 2 artifacts rested beneath the cold light. A thick ledger bound in blackened leather, corners scorched by furnace heat, a frost-covered glass case containing a rolled parchment inscribed with Russian imperial filigree. The scriptorum exhaled, and a dull metallic groan echoed through the corridor, like an old locomotive settling on rusted rails. The archivist touched the ledger first. Cold dust rose softly. The air darkened. Cover up 15, the furnace ledger. The American Gilded Age was a spectacle of ambition, railways slicing the continent, factories rising like iron cathedrals, telegraph wires stitching the nation's pulse together. Behind the golden facade, however, lay the secrets that fueled entire dynasties, and it was one of these that filled the furnace ledger. The scroll began not in a boardroom, but in an estate perched above a mining town, an estate whose windows glowed at night with lamplight long after the workers below had collapsed in their shacks. The dynasty at its center, referred to in the hidden margins only as the Blackwell family, controlled a network of steel mills, railroads, and investment arms that shaped the birth of American industrial capitalism. Their public portrait showed upright posture, stern jaws, and a family lineage forged by hard work and divine providence. But the ledger revealed a different engine beneath their empire. It began as a private book of accounts, recording shipments, investments, and acquisitions. Yet scattered between the pages, coded, disguised beneath the arithmetic, were entries that had nothing to do with commerce. The archivist read a sample. Carriage sent to the glass house. Midnight. Free guest requiring silence. Compensation double for discretion. Another entry. Clock tower room prepared for the iron gathering. Necessary diversions arranged. Ensure no servants remain. And a third. DACA. Letter from S received. Demand met. Proceed with purchase of Riverbend factory to avoid exposure. The coded notes detailed gatherings not meant for public view, nights in hidden rooms above industrial foundries, meetings held in shuttered greenhouse chambers behind the estate, where the air filled with lantern glow and whispered negotiations. The scroll never described these meetings in explicit detail, but the implication was unmistakable. Powerful men, indulging private desires that made them vulnerable. And vulnerability, in an age defined by ruthless expansion, meant danger. Enter S. The scroll named the blackmailer only by that single letter. S knew every detail of the family's private world. S witnessed the clandestine gatherings. S collected letters, photographs, testimonies. S mastered silence as a weapon. The Blackwells were not merely victims of blackmail. They were reshaped by it. Every demand S made warped early industrial policy. Rail lines redirected from profitable routes to remote, unnecessary locations. Mining rights accidentally granted to shell companies connected to S. Court cases involving safety violations quietly dropped. Senators persuaded through bribes disguised as investment opportunities. The furnace ledger cataloged each distortion of public policy, every law bent, every contract manipulated, every worker condemned to unsafe conditions because silence was more valuable than justice. The archivist turned a page. On a thick sheet, a single line was written in darker ink, the handwriting shakier than the rest. We have built an empire on steel and secrets. May the first never melt, and the second never surface. But secrets always surface. The ledger ended abruptly, the last pages scorched and brittle, edges blackened by the flames that consumed the Blackwell estate the night it burned to the ground. Official cause, electrical wiring failure. Unofficial truth, S had demanded something the dynasty refused to pay. The fire consumed the family mansion, and with it, most of the incriminating documents, save the ledger, preserved by the scriptorum long before the flames reached it. The archivist shut the book. Cold soot clung to his fingers. He set the ledger aside, and felt a momentary rumble beneath the floor, as though the subterranean vault reacted to the reawakening of industrial corruption. Then he reached for the frost-covered scroll. The glass cracked softly beneath his touch. Cold spilled out, air colder than winter on the Never River, colder than imperial marble halls lit by 1,000 candles yet never warm. Cover up 16, the winter circle. The parchment unfurled slowly, its edges stiff with frost. The ink had faded to a deep, iron blue, as if ice itself had seeped into the strokes. The header bore the emblem of the Russian Empire, a double-headed eagle clutching a scepter and an orb, but someone had drawn a thin line across one of its heads, almost invisible unless viewed at an angle. The archivist read, "Testimony of the Winter Circle, recorded in shadow, erased in revolution." The Winter Circle was a private gathering of nobles, officials, mystics, and philosophers who met not in salons or ballrooms, but in forgotten wings of the Tsar's palaces. Their power did not come from formal office, but from proximity, whispered counsel given in unguarded hours, their secrets forming a parallel government beneath the empire's frozen veneer. They met in chambers lit by oil lamps shaped like icicles, the light casting sharp reflections across mirrored marble floors. Heavy curtains dulled the sound of revelry from distant halls where official court ceremonies played out. The scroll described the circle's meetings with cold precision. 11 chairs, 10 filled, one always empty. The empty chair represented the Tsar himself, a symbolic acknowledgement that their true influence operated only when he was absent enough to be guided. Members spoke in riddles, half political, half esoteric. The migrations of troops explained through metaphors of winter storms, tax decrees shaped by allegories of wolves in the snow, diplomatic maneuvers disguised as tales of frozen rivers and thawing alliances. Their rituals were not physical but symbolic, not sensual but psychological. At the heart of their gatherings were whispered confessions, private desires, dangerous impulses, vulnerabilities only those closest to the Tsar could exploit. These confessions gave the circle leverage, and leverage allowed them to steer the monarch. The scroll documented 3 major decisions shaped by the circle's influence. A winter mobilization ordered not for strategy but to silence a noble's personal scandal. A foreign treaty pushed through because a circle member held compromising letters exchanged with Grand Duke. A purge of government officers engineered to hide the private life of a minister too valuable to lose. But revolution watches even the footprints hidden under snow. When the uprising swept across Russia, propaganda artists eagerly erased anything that suggested corruption within the old regime. The Winter Circle became too dangerous a truth, proof that the Tsar had been guided by secret, personal vulnerabilities rather than divine authority. Thus the erasure began. Names removed from registries, portraits altered, rooms sealed, documents burned. Whispers stamped flat by the boots of ideology. Only this parchment survived, hidden beneath the floorboard of a palace that later became a museum, discovered by a curator who did not understand its significance until the scriptorium claimed it. At the bottom of the scroll, a final line was written in a hurried hand. History froze our sins so they could not bleed. Revolution shattered them so they could not thaw. The archivist rolled the scroll closed. Frost clung to his fingertips, melting slowly in the warmer air of the vault. Behind him, a mechanical hiss breathed through the scriptorium, steam pipes exhaling like iron lungs. 2 eras, 2 empires, 2 cover-ups where wealth, influence, and private shadows shaped the world. He placed the scrolls together on the pedestal. The vault dimmed, then brightened, acknowledging the completion of Part 1. The western vault settled into stillness as the archivist stood between the furnace ledger and the Winter Circle scroll. The air tasted of iron and frost, an atmosphere thick with the memory of factories groaning through the night and palaces muffled beneath endless winter. This chamber was unlike the others. Its stones vibrated faintly, as though pipes deep beneath the scriptorium carried the pulse of old machines. 2 secrets had awakened. 2 empires had whispered their buried truths. But the scriptorium was not finished. A mechanical click echoed through the vault. A nearby iron door, one the archivist had not seen, slowly unlatched itself. Cold steam drifted from its edges, curling into the chamber like the breath of some long-dormant engine. The archivist stepped through. The iron gallery. The corridor beyond felt like the interior of a railway engine. Iron beams arched overhead, glowing faintly with the heat of unseen fires. The floor was grated metal, echoing with each step. Steam hissed through narrow pipes lining the walls, their valves glowing red like watchful eyes. This gallery belonged to the Gilded Age. On its left side stood a row of display cases containing artifacts reclaimed from the ruins of burned mansions and collapsed factories. or a brass pocket watch engraved with initials from a magnate's private circle, or a fragment of a photograph where only shadows remained, faces scratched away, a ledger pages written in numbers that conceal coded confessions, the charred remains of a safe door, blown open from inside. The archivist paused at the photograph fragment. Even burned and incomplete, it captured something damning. A chandelier overhead, velvet curtains behind, a circle of silhouettes seated close, too close for business. Yet the scroll had been clear that these gatherings were not described in physical terms. Instead, their danger lay in the information exchanged amid those shadows. Secrets traded like currency. Power negotiated perilously close to ruin. The archivist set the fragment back in its case. A low tremor passed through the gallery, like the groan of an engine warming. As he moved deeper, the corridor's atmosphere shifted. Steam thinned. Metal chilled. The lamps dimmed to bluish halos. He entered a space car from cold stone. The Frost Vault. It was colder than any room in the scriptorium. Breath crystallized in the air. Frost crept along the walls in delicate patterns resembling imperial filigree. The scent of the Russian winter, the sharp, knife-like cold of palace courtyards, clung to the space. This was the counterpart to the Iron Gallery, a vault bearing the remnants of the Winter Circle. At its center stood a round marble table, cracked in places where frost had split the stone. Upon it rested object that once belonged to the Tsar's secret advisers. A crystal goblet veiled in ice, a ceremonial quill with a sapphire tip, an iron emblem of the Romanov eagle, broken cleanly in half, a leather-bound journal frozen shut. The archivist approached the journal. Ice sealed its cover like a tomb. He touched the binding. Heat from his hand softened the frost just enough for the cover to open. Inside, the journal's pages were filled with the handwriting of several different members of the Winter Circle, neat aristocratic script, hasty scrawl, meticulous symbols. Sheaves of entries blended political maneuvers with private admissions, coded emotions disguised as metaphors of snowstorms, nights in cold halls, and the hour when frost thins. No explicit confessions were written outright, but the tone made clear that the circle wielded its knowledge of vulnerability, of affection, obsession, temptation, loneliness, as tools sharper than sabers. One passage stood out. He envies the warmth of those who do not bear crowns. This weakness must be our guiding star. Another, a letter malpositioned, a glance too long. We need only collect the fragments. He will bend. And a third, written the night before the uprising. We built a throne of frozen secrets. But ice fractures before steel. The archivist closed the journal. Cracks spidered across the frost at his feet. The Winter Circle had been powerful not because of rituals or influence alone, but because they understood the human cracks in imperial armor, the private fears, hidden dependences, and forbidden affections that could steer a monarch more effectively than any decree. A gust of cold air drifted past him. Not natural. The scriptorium was reacting. The frost thickened along the walls, forming mirrored surfaces. In each reflection, the archivist saw different scenes. The Tsar walking alone through a silent corridor, his breath fogging the frozen air, or a noble slipping a sealed letter beneath a door, glancing over his shoulder, a circle member leaning over a map, speaking in metaphors while a trembling minister listened, or a fire in the palace archives, flames consuming documents, masks, letters, names. The mirrors clouded. Then they cleared. Empty. Cold. Still. The archivist stepped back from the table. A faint chime echoed behind him. The convergence chamber. At the far end of the frost vault, a heavy door of riveted steel slid open, not by mechanism, but by recognition. The scriptorium accepted that both stories had been fully awakened, and now demanded the archivist witness their convergence. He entered a circular chamber halfway between the Iron Gallery and the Frost Vault. Half of the room was industrial steel, warm, glowing faintly with furnace heat. The other half was carved marble, cold enough to burn skin. At the center stood a pedestal. Upon it rested a single sheet of parchment, blank. But as he approached, ink began to appear on its own, rising through fibers like veins filling with dark blood. Two scripts emerged, American legend notations on the left, Russian cursive on the right. The message formed slowly, deliberately. Empires built on industry and empire built on trust share a single truth. Secrets, not iron or ice, shape the world. Below the sentence, a second line materialized. One family burned their sin. One monarchy froze theirs. History preserved both. The parchment folded itself, then dissolved into smoke. The chamber dimmed, returned to the western vault. As the archivist stepped back into the western vault, the torches brightened to a steady flame. The furnace ledger and the winter circle scroll pulsed with brief, quiet warmth, as if acknowledging their stories had been re-threaded into the scriptorium's tapestry. He placed both artifacts in the vault's recessed alcove. The metal plate slid shut with a hiss of steam and a whisper of ice. A deep rumble moved through the scriptorium. The vault accepted Section 8. The torches steadied. The air cleared. A faint echo remained, coal smoke blending with winter wind, the twin aftertaste of two empires that shaped history with steel and secrets, palaces and shadows. The southern wing of the black scriptorium had always been the quietest, its passages narrow, its torches dimmer, its stones colder. The archivist stepped into it with deliberate calm, for this wing held a histories born not from royal palaces or imperial courts, but from trenches gouged into the earth, barracks that stank of metal and fear, and command rooms where the fate of continents shifted beneath red-lit lamps. 2 sealed boxes awaited him. One was military-gray steel, dented, rusted along the corners, stamped with a number rather than a title, Unit 47 Delta. The other was black lacquered bound with leather straps, its clasp shaped like twin daggers crossing beneath the circle. War breathed differently inside this vault. The air tasted of cold sweat, paper dust, and iron, the scent of decisions made in the dark and never spoken again. The scriptorium extinguished every torch except one. The archivist approached the first box. Cover-up 17, Unit 47 Delta. The steel box opened with a slow metallic groan, as though it resisted remembering. Inside lay a stack of folders bound with military twine, their edges burnt and water-stained. Uniform tags, torn insignias, cipher sheets, and battered field notebooks filled the remaining space. At the very top rested a single document stamped, "Confidential, Forbidden Archive, do not reference." The archivist unfolded it. For a moment, only silence. Then the truth surfaced in ink the color of dried blood. Unit 47 Delta was not a combat group. It was not reconnaissance, engineering, or logistics. It was a wartime intelligence unit specializing in something more ancient than strategy yet more influential than any weapon. They called themselves the Initiates of the Veil. Their task, to infiltrate enemy ranks not through camouflage or stealth, but through intimacy built on trust, allure, and psychological magnetism, an intricate ritual disguised as seduction, honed for gathering intelligence and steering officers into revealing their vulnerabilities. No explicit acts were recorded. What was written instead was far more dangerous. Initiation requires a weaving of desire with allegiance, knowledge gained through proximity, loyalty extracted through unguarded moment. Each initiate underwent a ritual not of flesh but of identity, erasing their civilian persona and adopting one crafted by intelligence officers who understood the psychology of longing, the exact tone of voice that disarms, the precise gesture that unravels caution, the type of gaze that lingers long enough to become a mirror. The scroll described a room used for their initiation ceremonies, a concrete bunker beneath a military hospital, illuminated by a single lamp, walls painted with coded sigils disguised as unit numbers. The initiates stood in a circle. Each recited a vow. I use a weapon unseen. I disarm with what others fear to wield. My battlefield is the unguarded heart. From there, they were deployed into the shadows of war, or officers' lounges thick with smoke and fatigue, or infirmaries where wounded commanders whispered secrets under morphine haze, and neutral city hotels where enemy diplomats sought temporary escape, dim train stations where soldiers waited restless for orders. The initiates listened, observed, guided conversations, swayed decisions with carefully timed silences and gestures. Their work shaped troop movements, diverted offensives, and intercepted coded correspondence. They exploited not physicality but human instinct, the deep hunger for comfort amid chaos. One file detailed an operation in 1916. Objective: extract the location of ammunition reserves. Method: emotional anchoring. Outcome: successful. Casualty: officer committed self-inflicted removal after realizing breach. Another from 1918. Operative 1-2 gained access to High Command map room. Information transmitted under guise of personal confession. But such methods frightened the traditional military hierarchy. When the war ended, Unit 47 Delta became a liability. Their techniques, effective yet unnerving, threatened the moral facade nations wish to restore. Their rituals blurred the line between espionage and manipulation, and their continued existence was deemed dangerous to post-war stability. Thus began the Purge. Pages in the files described it. Initiates discharge under fabricated accusations. Training records burned in a courtyard under midnight supervision. Commanding officers reassigned. Coded diaries seized and incinerated. Yet the scriptorium had saved fragments. The archivist examined a small journal found at the bottom of the box. The handwriting was tight, precise, disciplined. He read, "War bends men until their truths fall out. We merely catch what the bending reveals." Another entry: "History will deny we existed. War will remember." The archivist closed the journal. A faint vibration traveled through the vault, the lingering signature of a truth once buried under medals and patriotic narratives. He set the gray box aside. Then he lifted the lacquered case. Cold brushed his fingertips. Cover up 18, the shadow pendulum. The clasp snapped open with a brittle crack. Inside lay 3 objects. A crimson war map, its surface scarred with overlapping troop routes. A small black notebook sealed with wire. A broken silver medallion bearing no recognizable emblem. The archivist unrolled the map first. Its markings sprawled across continents, arrows from Axis powers intersecting with Allied commands, crossed-out operations, rewritten strategies. But hidden beneath the visible lines were faint markings written in a different ink, older and more delicate, invisible unless held at the right angle. The archivist tilted the map toward the torchlight. Lines emerged. Curves instead of arrows, loops instead of fronts, paths that looked less like military directives and more like psychological influence. At the center of the map, spanning Europe, a single phrase curled like a serpent. They desire what shapes them. The shadow organization behind this phrase had no official name. Its members worked behind both fronts, Axis and Allied, slipping between nations disguised as diplomats, cultural attachés, advisors, correspondents, archivists. They collected not strategic intelligence but private vulnerabilities, romantic entanglements, commanders under stoic uniforms, secret obsessions of ministers, attachments that could be exploited, fears no nation dared document. They did not belong to one ideology. They served influence itself. The scroll described their methods: gathering diaries left behind in bombed cities, or intercepting letters framed with personal confessions, studying psychological profiles of generals, identifying which leaders could be swayed through affection, validation, envy, or guilt. They used desire only as an axis, never shown explicitly, always implied through emotional architecture. Once a vulnerability was understood, the organization acted quietly, altering peace negotiations through well-timed personal messages, or redirecting the ambitions of certain officers through carefully placed illusions of admiration, or intensifying rivalries between Axis leaders through deliberate emotional misdirection, or softening the resolve of Allied diplomats by manipulating the perception of loyalty. One annotation read, "He leads finest when reassured he is admired. Send a message at dawn." Another, "Her grief shapes her choices. Exploit but do not break." And another, written in a trembling hand, "We move nations by moving the fragile center inside their leaders." When the war ended, both sides sought to erase the existence of such an organization. The Axis saw it as a corruption, the Allies as an embarrassment, intelligence communities as a threat, historians as an impossibility. The organization itself vanished into smoke, its members scattering, their archives burned. Only this map survived, along with a black notebook. The archivist picked up the notebook. The wire holding it shut was thin, malleable. He unwound it. Inside were coded entries, symbols resembling constellations, directory codes, names disguised as equations. But the final page needed no translation. He read, "War's End." But the chambers where decisions fracture remained hidden beneath metals and graves. The archivist closed the notebook. The southern torches flickered in acknowledgement, casting crimson light across the vault like blood spilled over maps. He placed both artifacts, Unit 47 Delta and the Shadow Pendulum, into the recessed chamber. The vault sealed itself. A low hum traveled through the scriptorium. Section 9 was complete. War had whispered its concealed truths. The scriptorium dimmed to a deep war room red. The archivist remained still as the southern vault sealed itself, the metal sliding shut with an echo that reverberated through the foundations like distant artillery. The air tasted of dust from trench walls, damp wool from soldiers' coats, and the faint bitterness of scorched paper, always a scent of secrets burned to protect reputations. But Section 9 was not yet complete. The southern wing expanded around him, revealing new corridors that had not been visible before. War hides its chambers even from those who search for truth, and the scriptorium respected this nature. It exposed only what it deemed the archivist ready to see. A thin beam of red light traced a path for him. He followed the interrogation corridor. The passage narrowed until it resembled the hallway of a military detention building. Bare walls, riveted doors, and lamps hanging low like watchful eyes. The metallic floor clanged softly with each step. The archivist felt the pressure of countless suppressed confessions vibrating through the stone. On the first door, a small metal plaque read, 47 Delta Operation Lantern. He opened it. The room inside was dark, a table bolted to the floor, 2 chairs, a single overhead bulb casting a harsh white circle across the table's surface. Nothing else. Yet as the archivist stepped inside, the room shifted. The air thickened. The lamp flickered. The shadows deepened. Images surfaced. Not visions, but historical impressions burned into the room's memory. An officer leaning forward, his voice low with exhaustion, revealing troop numbers he should never have spoken aloud. An initiate sitting across from him, expression calm, posture relaxed, tone gentle, guiding him to speak more freely without force. A notebook on the table, blank pages absorbing every detail without judgment. No physical closeness was shown, only the psychological architecture trust. The initiate's greatest weapon. A whisper drifted through the air, faint, like an echo from a past conversation. People do not confess to the strong, only to those who make them feel seen. The archivist exhaled slowly, truth extracted without coercion, secrets shared willingly under the illusion of safety. He stepped back into the corridor. Another door waited him. Room of the broken cipher. Its plaque bore no number, only a symbol, a circle with a diagonal slash. Inside the room, walls were covered with torn maps, coded messages, strips of telegraph tape. A stenographer's machine sat on a desk, keys worn down by frantic fingers. The archivist scanned the walls. One map showed trenches along the western front, traced with blue and red lines. But beneath the obvious markings were dozens of tiny dots connecting in patterns more emotional than strategic. Dots marking commanders known for impulsive decisions. Dots for those whose morale was influenced by praise or isolation. Dots marking officers who trusted their lovers more than their superior officers. Dots for diplomats whose loyalties weakened when confronted with perceived admiration. It was a psychological vulnerability map, one used by Unit 47 Delta. No seduction. No intimacy, only careful study of how human longing shapes decisions under pressure. A torn memorandum lay pinned to the wall. The enemy's weakness is never their weapons, only the small human ache they cannot guard. The archivist reached for the paper. The ink was smudged by water, not rainwater, but tears. Someone had realized too late what their confession had cost the battlefield. He let the paper hang. The room dimmed behind him as he left. The gallery of crimson maps. Farther down the corridor, a heavy blast door opened automatically, revealing a chamber lit entirely in deep red. It resembled a general's war room, tables covered in maps, pins marking territory, strings connecting decisions across continents. But something was wrong. The maps were not aligned to any known front. They twisted, overlapped, as if several histories were being overlaid at once. The archivist approached the central table. Pinned to it was a map so large it spilled over the edges: Europe, the Pacific, the Middle East, Africa, all marked with diverging arrows. But between the military routes were faint inscriptions in charcoal gray ink. He leaned closer. These symbols matched those in the Shadow Pendulum's notebook. He ran his finger along the markings, line connecting leaders, not armies, connecting obsessions, not strategies, connecting private fears, not supply routes. One annotation read, "He will choose caution tomorrow. Anchor his decision by reminding him of the letter he has not yet answered." Another, "Shift her resolve through silence. Her uncertainty is a door." And a third, "War is not won by force alone. Guide the heart, and the hand follows." The archivist stood still. This was not manipulation of flesh or desire in any explicit form, only the subtle pull of human attachment, the quiet gravity of longing, the ever-present vulnerability that even generals and dictators could not escape. Desire as strategy, fear as leverage, confession as weapon. The red lights brightened, illuminating the overlapping lines like veins in an organism. History's arteries. He moved on. The chamber of erased voices. At the far end of the gallery, a soft hum whispered through the door seams. When the archivist opened it, he entered a semi-dark room filled with hundreds of file cabinets stretching upward into shadow. Each drawer was marked with a year, a name, or a code name, some crossed out by governments long dead. He pulled open a random drawer. Inside lay dozens of letters. Not love letters, not tawdry confessions, but letters written in wartime loneliness. Or a general to a confidant he trusted more than his own staff, or a diplomat confessing doubts about the war's moral direction, or a field commander writing to someone whose admiration steadied him, or a minister begging for reassurance in moments of private collapse. Each one ended abruptly, cut off mid-sentence, never delivered, intercepted by the shadow pendulum. They used the contents not to manipulate physically, but to understand psychological contees, how fear shaped choices, how longing influenced diplomacy, how a single unanswered message could sway a leader's resolve. The archivist placed the letters back. A faint tremor traveled through the floor as he closed a drawer, as though the scriptorium recognized the weight of personal vulnerabilities once weaponized in the theater of global conflict. The convergence of wars. A doorway opened ahead. He stepped into a circular space where both Cover-Up 17 and Cover-Up 18 merged, two war rooms overlapping, two methods intersecting. On one half of the circle stood artifacts of Unit 47 Delta, coded diaries, psychological profiles, training vows etched on metal plates. On the other half were relics of the Shadow Pendulum, black notebooks, spectral war maps, sealed envelopes with names now erased by history. At the center stood a single pedestal. On it rested a sheet of parchment. Ink bloomed across it like a spreading bruise. The archivist read, "War reveals desire. Desire reveals truth. Truth is the only chamber general's fury." A second line appeared beneath it, written in two scripts, military block letters blending into elegant intelligence cursive. Nations win battles with guns, but wars are steered by what their leaders cannot admit. The parchment folded itself and vanished into ash. The chamber lights dimmed. The southern wing fell silent. War's hidden chambers had been opened. The archivist returned to the central vault. He lifted the two now awakened artifacts. The steel box of Unit 47 Delta, the lacquered case of the Shadow Pendulum. He placed them carefully into their compartments. The vault sealed with a sound like a bolt sliding across an iron door. A deep hum passed through the scriptorium. Acknowledgement, completion, acceptance. Section 9 was done. The torches brightened. The air cleared. The taste of iron faded. But the echo of whispered strategy, of unspoken longing, of psychological fractures exploited at global scale, those lingered. The northernmost wing of the black scriptorium awakened as though sensing the archivist's approach. Lights flickered on one by one. Not torches, but narrow strips of pale fluorescence embedded in stone, humming with the same cadence as antiquated computer servers. The stones here were colder than any other section, infused not with ancient dust but with a sterile chill of hidden laboratories, intelligent facilities, and forgotten research bunkers. The archivist stepped forward. 20 seals glowed faintly on the far wall, 19 dim, one still dark. The 20th would illuminate only when the final truth was placed. He approached the last set of vaults. These did not open with keys or clasps. They responded to pulse, memory, resonance. He placed his hand on the first. A low hum answered him, electrical, metallic, a vibration familiar only to those who had ever stood in a room full of Cold War computers, their servers stacked like monolith humming secrets no one was meant to read. The vault parted. Inside lay a single object wrapped in an olive-green cloth, a Cold War era reel-to-reel tape, the label half-burned, the remaining text reading only. Program Nightmoth a redaction level, absolute. The archivist unwrapped it. Static crackled in the air. Dust did not rise, only a faint scent of solder and dead circuitry. Cover-up 19, Program Nightmoth. Nightmoth began in 1961, in a bunker buried beneath a classified air base. Not a seduction program, never that, but a psychological experiment that studied how emotionally charged symbolism could influence loyalty, decision-making, or confession under the veil of secrecy. The government funding it labeled it a behavioral ritual study, a term vague enough to avoid immediate scrutiny and ominous enough to invite the curiosity of intelligence agencies desperate for advantage. The archivist unspooled the tape. As a magnetic ribbon loosened, the vault projected its contents across the air in flickering gray light. No images, only text fragments, audio transcriptions, and sensor readings recorded during the program. Subject, they responded to symbolic framing with increased trust. Subject, he confessed to unrelated secrets after association sequence. Subject G altered moral stance after repeated exposure to guided ritual cues. None of it involved physical touch. None of it crossed into explicit territory. Instead, Nightmoth weaponized a subtle architecture of desire, longing for belonging, hunger for validation, craving for significance. The program identified that human psychology responded powerfully to ritualistic atmospheres, dim lights, repeated sounds, carefully timed affirmations. If one created the illusion of being chosen, witnessed, or understood, subject surrendered information willingly. A note flashed across the projection. Emotional hunger is the most efficient intelligence lever. Another, desire is not always erotic. Often it is a need to be seen. Nightmoth constructed entire rooms designed to stimulate this need. Chambers with low-frequency hums mimicking a heartbeat, dim lighting that softened edges and lowered defenses, controlled scents that evoked nostalgia, sequences of phrases spoken in measured tones that fostered trust. Participants believed they were undergoing tests of memory or stress. In reality, they were being studied for how their internal longings influenced confession. An especially redacted file emerged, its margins scorched black. Protocol S, subject placed in symbolic containment circle. Lines represent safety barrier. Responses increased by 47%. The circle was not mystical, it was psychological. Subject stepped inside and felt chosen, protected. This triggered openness. The ritual atmosphere produced clarity and vulnerability. The intelligence community saw potential. Too much potential. Thus Nightmoth expanded, quietly, invisibly, yet never officially acknowledged. No uniforms, no medals, no chain of command, only whispered directives, handed from one analyst to another like illicit scripture. One segment of the projection displayed a final note, handwritten and uneven. We have built a cathedral of influence without faith, without gods. Only human longing kneels at its altar. Then the recording fell silent. The archivist rewrapped the tape and set it into the vault's receptacle. The light above it glowed a deep violet, the mark of truth the world was not meant to know. But he did not pause. The next vault stirred. Cover-Up 20, the modern scandal of the veiled signal. A software of fans and processors emanated from within the compartment, technology humming like the chants of digital monks. Screens illuminated themselves across the vault walls, displaying strings of fragmented code, redacted news headlines, and surveillance images blurred into abstraction. The archivist stepped inside. This vault was different from all the others. It pulsed, not with memory, but with current activity. Cover-Up 20 had never truly ended. It had only shifted shape. A holographic interface materialized before him, displaying a single modern government insignia, though the national origin was masked by obfuscation protocols. A file title appeared. Project Veiled Signal, Operational Timeline. He opened it. Lines of metadata streamed across the air. A misinformation campaign disguised as cultural movements, manipulated hashtags driven by thousands of ghost accounts, digital rituals embedded in seemingly mundane media, symbolic cues hidden in advertisements and political speeches, orchestrated leaks timed to shape public sentiment through emotional irresistibility. Again, none of it involved explicit acts. This was influenced by ritual imagery, emotional catalysis, symbolic seduction, patterns crafted to bypass critical thought through psychological resonance. Veiled Signal did not use touch or voice. It used behavioral echo chambers. One classified note displayed. Desire for belonging drives belief. Engineered desire. Another, we do not manipulate facts. We manipulate attachment to identity. The archivist navigated deeper. He found records of ritual nodes, pieces of imagery repeated across digital landscapes, unnoticed by most. Circles hidden in political logos, sequences of colors recurring across seemingly random accounts, a phrasing that mimicked ancient incantation structures, or emotionally charged symbols placed at the end of automated posts. Public consciousness responded to these patterns with uncanny predictability. A third file opened automatically, labeled Sequence 7, the red thread. Text unfolded. Attach red thread imagery to targeted content. It triggers subconscious associations of danger, passion, urgency. Amplifies viral response. The archivist could almost feel the hum of servers beneath the earth, the ultralight machines guiding the world with invisible prayers. Another file revealed the central truth. The scandal was not the symbol. The scandal was why the symbol worked. This program targeted officials, ministers, directors, analysts whose private doubts or ambitions were known through harvested digital footprints. What speeches they lingered over on video, what images quickened their pulse, what nostalgic songs they looped, or what validation they chased online. Through these insights, Veiled Signal shaped political outcomes. A vote swung by emotional storms orchestrated in advance, a treaties influenced by carefully timed symbolic cues, careers elevated or destroyed through viral cascades, scandals buried under engineered distraction rituals. A subfolder lit up. Emergency Containment Protocol Reason, Public Discovery Risk. Inside, a single line of text. If revealed, global trust structures collapse. The archivist inhaled. The 20th truth was the most dangerous because it was contemporary, alive, adaptive, not ancient stone or forgotten parchment, but a system growing stronger through the very denial of its existence. He closed the vault. The final seal remained unlit. Only one step remained. The archivist's revelation begins. The scriptorium trembled lightly as if anticipating the end. All 20 vaults whispered. Stone, server, parchment, code, merging eras into one chorus. The archivist walked to the center, where a circular platform waited. Above it hovered a blank black tablet. The final seal. He placed his hand upon it. The tablet pulsed. One line of text appeared, as though written by the scriptorium itself. Why were the 20 truths hidden? The archivist exhaled slowly. He answered, and the scriptorium began to glow. The scriptorium darkened. Every torch extinguished, every lamp dimmed, Every humming server lowered its pitch until the entire subterranean archive seemed to inhale as one colossal organism. Only the circular platform beneath the archivist remained lit, glowing with a pale, shifting luminescence, neither flame nor electricity, but something that belonged equally to both ancient temples and modern intelligence bunkers. The black tablet hovering above the platform awaited his answer. Its single line pulsed. Why were the 20 truths hidden? The archivist did not hesitate. His voice, when he spoke, echoed like a ritual invocation, because desire shapes the world more than law, sword, or scripture. The scriptorium reacted immediately. The tablet brightened. The platform trembled. Stone and circuitry merged, as if the entire chamber had been waiting centuries for this one admission. Around him, the 20 vault began to stir. The vault speak. First came the low hum of ancient reed tablets, their clay surfaces vibrating softly as the lies of priest-kings rustled like forgotten sandstorms. Then the whisper of Egyptian papyrus, its ink refusing to stay silent after millennia of enforced erasure. Then the crackle of Greek manuscripts rewritten beneath philosophical respectability. Then the thrum of Roman marble walls echoing with the weight of patrician indulgence buried under Senate decrees. Each era joined the chorus. Hand silk rustling like a concubine's breath behind a closed curtain. Mauryan scrolls glowing faintly with the embers of sex burned alive. Monastic chants from Europe drifting like incense through the dark. A Byzantine trials echoing in iron shackles. A Tudor velvet whispering secrets stained into fabric. A French Valois sigil flickering beneath centuries of falsified witchcraft. A colonial governor's redacted journal fluttering as though aflame. Aztec glyphs pulsing through missionary ink. A Ottoman court edicts rustling like veiled dancers. A Victorian letters sealed under moral hypocrisy. O industrial dynasties trembling beneath ledgers that concealed as much as they recorded. A Russian palace keys jingling faintly in their graves. A wartime maps glowing crimson as old strategies reignited in spectral form. O Cold War reel-to-reel tapes winding softly as if rewinding themselves. A modern digital script scrolling across invisible servers like prayers in binary. All 20 cover-ups sang at once. Not words, vibrations, the resonance of truths long suppressed. Servers hummed like ancient altars. Stone trembled like living flesh. Ink glowed like hot coals. The archivist stood at the center of the roaring silence. The scriptorium demands more. The tablet pulsed again. A new line formed. Why did they hide what shaped them? The archivist lifted the tablet, though it resisted, heavy as a sealed oath, because desire reveals a part of a ruler that cannot be commanded. The vault shuddered. Files flew open. Digital screens flickered into symbol-like spirals. The scriptorium accepted the answer but hungered for the deeper truth. A third line appeared. Why must these truths remain sealed? The archivist closed his eyes. The torches reignited, this time not with orange fire, but with a cold blue flame that illuminated the chamber like an underwater cathedral. The vault shadows stretched out, converging toward him as if reaching. He opened his eyes. Because if the world learns that desire has shaped every dynasty, every war, every revolution, then the myth of rational power collapses. With that admission, the platform beneath his feet glowed brighter, merging the light of old past eras. A lunar silver from Mesopotamian nights, a gold from Egyptian sanctuaries, a marble white from Greek courts, a crimson from Roman torches, a jade from Chinese palaces, a saffron from Indian rites, candle yellow from European monasteries, or imperial purple from Byzantium, a emerald from Tudor chambers, a black lace from the French court, a jungle green from Mesoamerican ruins, a gunmetal from colonial forts, opal from Ottoman harems, a gaslamp gray from Victorian London, a soot black from industrial dynasties, a frost blue from Russian winters, blood red from world wars, a static white from Cold War bunkers, neon from modern servers pulsing like ritual sigils, all color condensed into a single blinding sphere of truth. The archivist's confession. The scriptorium now displayed the final question. Why you? The archivist inhaled. The air tasted of static, dust, and the metallic tang of secrets too long locked. He spoke, because someone must remember without sanction. A pause, because someone must read what power erased. A deeper breath, because every civilization crafts lies about itself, and someone must guard the unedited version. The vaults quieted, the blue flames dimmed, the servers pulsed like a heartbeat slowing, but the scriptorium was not finished. A final line formed, letters appearing with deliberate slowness. What will you do with these truths? The archivist lowered his head, and the answer came not as confession, but as ritual. I will seal them again. A tremor shook the chamber. The tablet flared. Every vault door vibrated violently, as though the truths inside protested their reburial. But the archivist continued. History is not ready to admit how deeply it was shaped by longing. The walls flickered with images of every era's concealed scandals, nor how easily desire guided empires to rise and fall. The vault lights dimmed to embers. Humanity would tear itself apart seeking to assign blame, righteousness, or meaning. The final seal brightened, but desire has no morality, only consequences. The scriptorium accepted his verdict. The final seal. The platform expanded, swallowing the archivist up to his ankles in light. The tablet dissolved into 1,000 drifting symbols, runes from every civilization, fragments of letters from every era, sigils from every secret order. They spiraled around him like a storm. The vaults sealed themselves one by one. Thud, thud, thud. Each sound echoed like a coffin closing on the corpse of a forgotten truth. 20 vaults, 20 cover-ups, 20 civilizations rewriting themselves to hide the same eternal truth. Desire shapes power. Power rewrites desire. And history lies about both. The final seal descended from above, an obsidian disk etched with 20 invisible lines. It hovered before the archivist. He touched it. Every torch went out. Every screen went blank. Every server stopped humming. Silence flooded the scriptorium. For the first time in centuries, the seal sank into place. The black scriptorium vanished into its deepest sleep. The archivist stood alone in absolute darkness, the last caretaker of the world's 20 most carefully buried truths. And somewhere above, in the world of daylight and nations and shifting allegiances, history continued repeating itself, blissfully unaware of the vault beneath it, humming with a ghost of desire.